Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them. Hello, weirdos! This is Diogo Nogueira, and today we have a very special guest on our podcast. I'm talking about Tony Vasinda from Plus One Exp. He is a game designer, a community leader, a podcaster, a producer. He does everything. He has a hand on a lot of cool stuff. He talks about his journey through the RPG space, how he worked on a lot of other projects and other space that helped a lot of great support, and how he learned how to implement that on the RPG space, how his journey through spirituality, religion, and teaching helped him create this channel that was really cool to teach games to other people, and how it's evolved to showcasing indie games and indie creators' work to the bigger community, how he worked with coffee, how he learned through life and his experiences, and how he applies that to his creativity work on Plus One experiences, how he amplifies the voices of other people, and how he sees this work very much as a collaboration and growing the community and doing this very special thing he's doing now with the Zine Club and promoting other voices and make RPGs as diverse and as special, as unique and as weird and wonderful as it can be. And I had this great chat with him. It got personal, it got weird, it was wonderful. I hope you listen to it, I hope you like it as much as we did. So let's get weird with Tony Vasinda. Hey Tony, first of all, welcome to Weird Games and Weird People. And how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. It's so good to be on, and so good to be talking to you.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to be here. You're kind of my inspiration too for doing like podcasts and then bringing people on, and then trying to promote people and connecting to them. And you really set a great example for this. And well, first of all, for all the weirdos that might be listening out there who don't know who you are, but most important, I want to hear from you. Who is Tony Vasinda, and what do you do, my friend?
Without breaking into the automatic pattern copy that I recite, I am a game designer, and I make beard balm stuff, and I do a lot of different creative projects. I'm based out of Philadelphia. I run a company along with two co-owners, Keegan and Sarah, called Plus One, where really our passion is helping small creators get their games into publication, and ideally, most importantly, to the table for people to play them. We do that in a lot of different ways. We make content, we cover other people's games, we share things, we help with marketing tools, we publish games, and then we design and release our own games. So sometimes I talk about us being the sin eaters of indie RPGs. So if there's something other RPG designers don't like doing, chances are we are trying to help do that thing so that they don't have to lots of the time.
Yeah, you do a lot of things, or involved in almost in all parts of the creative process of a game, right? Do you do design and art too, or is that the only thing you don't do?
I don't do art, but it's really been really great. We have a team member who I've worked with for 8 years across a lot of projects. They do. If you ever tune into any of our streams and you're looking at the overlays, if you are ever looking at our social media graphics, if you've ever picked up a game that was designed by us in-house, Johnny either did the graphic design and layout for it, or approved the graphic design and layout before it went to print. So we have an art director on team who's one of our most important team members, and is in the Philippines, not super active in RPGC, but they are a really great visual designer and creative designer who we've worked with for 8 years across everything we do. Nothing I do would work without Johnny. So we do have a team member who is focused on that, but they're not an illustrator. So yeah, art is really the one thing that our team does not do, but we will go find cool artists if people need cool artists.
You do art, not like visual, like illustration and stuff. You do your own kind of art, and how did you arrive at Plus One doing all those amazing things, helping everybody, and because sometimes people will see like this amazing thing, Plus One doing so much thing, and ask, oh, how can someone arrive at that point? Can you at least share with us a little bit of your journey until you
Yeah.
get into this point?
There's like it's probably could even start before Plus One. So my whole like zhuzh, my whole thing, lots of times has been looking at communities and industries and professional fields and kind of what doesn't work there, and then saying, okay, how do we help make those things at least a little bit better? And a lot of the times it's been looking at saying, how do we create better awareness for things? Because lots of times, I mean, I do firmly believe like most people want to be doing what is good, and most people want to be doing better. And at minimum, everybody wants things to be a little bit easier. So if we can figure out a way to make things easier and make doing good easier for people, then usually people will pick those things up. So I worked in professional development for youth workers, people who worked with teenagers for a long time, and built like huge platforms over there to help amplify lots of times small voices that we just thought were really great and weren't getting heard. And in the coffee industry, I developed training processes to help people learn to develop their palate better, right? Like a lot of different weird creative processes that all kind of go around with like, how do we help people just engage in a thing they love a little bit more and a little bit better? And I love tabletop games, and I did for years, ever since I was a kid, playing board games. My parents apparently, like I didn't realize this while I was an adult, were definitely impacted by the satanic panic. So they didn't never tell me I couldn't play RPGs. They were just always like, oh, the game store was sold out of RPGs when we went to go buy them for you. Like it's a very polite, weird little lie. But I noticed that board games had a lot of marketing support. And I was starting to do some indie RPG, like scented beard stuff, like, right, just like making beard balms and lotions and other stuff like that for like kind of classic six stats and other things like that for D&D. But I'd started playing indie RPGs over the course of that period of time also, and was like, I really wish indie RPGs had the same kind of support. And then the world shut down and we were all at home. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, that thing we've always said we were going to do, we have time to do it, and other people are interested in it now also too. So in 2020, we just started making videos. We just started playing games with people, and we started playing games with people really to make short 5-minute videos, because one of the biggest things people will constantly say the barrier to entry to learning RPGs is that hey, it takes so long to learn rules to a new game, which isn't true necessarily if the rules are presented well and they're explained in a way that makes them easy to understand. But not every indie RPG designer knows how to do that, and a book isn't always the best way to do it. So we started making these short 5-minute videos that we called TLDPs, too long didn't play, right? So if you hadn't played the game and wanted a 5-minute breakdown, we would do that. But part of that was I wasn't going to review anything we hadn't played. And so we just started playing games with people. We explicitly just decided at the very beginning of what we do, like, we don't play anything that is Wizards of the Coast related. And we really don't play anything that is large corporate game related. Like I'd play Magpie. Like, I mean, Magpie's a big game. I'd play Free League stuff now. Like we would certainly do that, because even though they've gotten big and they're significant market share, they're distinct enough, and they have like great creators that they're supporting. There's people that we can look at and say, here are the people, who consistently feed into this, right? Wizards, even though there are people behind all that, and I don't want to dismiss anybody who's a third party creator or who's worked on those projects, as a lot of my friends have, we just decided we weren't going to. Like, there's enough attention that automatically gets thrown there and at Paizo stuff and at other big games that are really connected to the Dragon game. And we just decided we wanted to go in a different way and really focus on OSR and story games and indie work. And I can't imagine doing anything else at this point in time. Like, it's been so rewarding over the last couple of years to just start doing that marketing work, start creating those videos, working with different creators, having them on, doing interviews with them. Like, I resisted being an interview show at first, but I do love sitting down and interviewing people. So like Phil Reed agreed to come on and do an interview, and I love Phil. Steve Jackson Games was hugely influential in me getting into this, because like I was an MIB for Steve Jackson Games for a couple years, and
Wow.
part of
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
part of being an MIB, which is Men in Black, which the program just died, and it's all very sad. We're very upset. Is means that you were a demo agent, right? So learning
Yeah.
how to run a game, explain it really quickly, and get people playing was something that I started doing through that. I even had a friend at one point who was like, we were just doing a game night. I was like, oh, I just got a game. Let me read the rules and we'll play it later tonight. And I brought it over and I took off the shrink wrap and I read the like 16-page rule book. And then I sat down, I just explained how to play to them. And they were like, how did you do that? And they're like, what? How did you read the rule book and then
Yeah.
turn around 5 minutes? Like there was
You're very
16
good at
dense
this.
pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then explain it to us. And I was like, I don't know. Someone's like, you should get a job doing that. I was like, that job doesn't exist. It's not a thing. No one would
It
ever pay
is.
you
Yeah.
money to
Now it
do
is.
that.
Yeah.
But that was in like
Yeah. Yeah.
2000 and like 2003, and so it's
Fantastic.
over
Yeah.
20 years ago. So yeah, now like that's what I do. My brain thinks in a way that lets it be really easy to kind of break all that information down, identify the key things, and then be able to say, here's what it's like. And so yeah,
Do you
but
have
then
any idea why it's so easy for you to deconstruct this and then present it in a easy way for the people to digest it? Do you
um
think it's like your formation in maybe the way you study design or engineer or analytics or any
yeah,
kind of upbringing that's helped you with this?
yeah, so I'm a white straight man, so telling other people how things are done is really just my bailiwick. No, so I think it's a couple things. Like I was a voracious reader as a kid. So like by the time I was in second grade, I had a collegiate like reading level. And I was reading books and texts or way things. And I really struggled as a young person to know how to communicate with peers. And let me clarify, there's a significant difference between education and intelligence, right? Like you can have a lot of information and
Yeah.
be a dummy, and you can be a genius and have very little information. Like, so I'm really only talking about information intake here, right? So my vocabulary was very big. It led to me easily understanding things. I liked words. I wasn't super into language, right? So I wasn't super concerned about English or Spanish or Latin or any other, learning languages, but I did love learning words, and I loved reading. I loved imaginary spaces. And I loved play. And I think, as a kid, one of the few areas that I felt like I really connected with other kids during, and this might sound like simple, but it was distinctively different for me, was on the playground. Like so I would organ like I was a weirdo, like I was a weird kid. I would organize things on the playground a lot. Like I would put together games like imagination play, other stuff like that, all the way through elementary school. And get a lot of people wrapped up and involved in these huge kind of imaginary games, or which were almost always like tag or hide and go seek or whatever
Yeah.
variants. But like there was like trying to quickly explain to a bunch of kids on the playground like what kind of game you want to play and how you want to play it. I think was a huge part of that. And then my mom is an educator by trade, and so learning from her and watching her work with folks who have special needs, who had developmental issues, other things like that, um, taught me really well how to kind of break things down as quickly as possible, I think. And then I think the last thing is my undergrads were all like humanities, philosophy, and theology. Um, and so even taking big ideas and saying, how do we break them down as simply as possible, has been something that like part of my early professional career was hugely focused on, right? How do you take a theological concept and present it to a 6-year-old or a 8-year-old or a high schooler or a young adult or an adult in a way that makes it easy for them to have a conversation around, right? Not just understand, but have an opinion on whether they agree or disagree with it. And that was a really huge part of what I did professionally, also for
Wow.
the first decade of my life, or first decade of my adult life, also too.
What
So,
was that work? What was?
so
Yeah.
yeah, I started as a youth worker, which is like my subtle way of saying like I worked for the Catholic Church for a long
Okay.
period of time. Which we could get into the institutional realities of the Catholic Church and why it's a broken and flawed
Yeah.
institution. If we want to, we could also talk about other stuff, but the but yeah, I spent 20 years doing youth work and doing training youth workers and working with children and then eventually adults within the context of the Catholic Church. And so, but it's really interesting. Like some people are like, "Hey, you have a lot of young people who don't grow up to be Catholic. Does that make you sad or make you feel like a failure?" And absolutely not. It never has. Like my favorite young people I've ever worked with, especially ones who I'm connected with as an adult, their faith or lack of faith doesn't have anything to do with me or the time that I spent with them. The relationship I have with them has to do with the time I spent with them. But whether or not I still care about them or whether I am proud of what they have accomplished in life, even though I have very little to do with a lot of it, is all pretty much about what they have done. And the fact that I've maintained a lot of those relationships and friendships, and the fact that those young people still feel comfortable reaching out to me to ask questions about that kind of stuff, even if they are, don't aren't Catholic anymore, or that they'll reach out for prayer even if they don't practice their faith anymore, or don't necessarily even believe it,
Are you
but
still a
because they need it.
practicing
Yeah,
Catholic?
I still am. Yeah, so like that's which is a
Do
weird
you go
thing
to
in some
church
ways.
like every
Yeah,
Sunday and stuff?
no, I'm really bad about that right now. Again, I've really strong hangups around the institution of the church, also
Yeah,
too. Like I mean, like like I said, the amount of good that the Catholic Church does in the world is great, and the amount of bad and evil that comes through the institution of the church is so crushingly heartbreaking. I think for pretty much anybody who's willing to be intellectually honest enough to acknowledge that that hurt and that pain exists. And so it is a complicated reality, and I live in an area where the church is super institutional. And when I say that, like that's a like we can think about the church as being a lot of different things, but like the institution is like the organization, right? The structure, the literal business entities as well as power structures that do things.
yeah.
And Philadelphia, where I live, is very mired in a very traditional mindset of the power structures of the church in America, which is kind of the worst. And so not to say there are like really great things that happen here in Philly that, but for me, yeah, there's also like the mystical dimension of the church, right? Like the transcendental uh goods and the spiritual life and the prayer and the other things that come through that,
Yeah.
the ineffable
Of
relationship
course,
with
yeah.
something, right? That's what I'm
Yeah.
in love with, and that's what I've always been in
Yeah.
love with. And no one probably has more scathing words for the institutional church than someone who's in love with other parts of the
Yeah.
church, because it is the part that tends to actively do harm to indigenous populations, to queer folks, to a lot of other people. And I think what even attracts people to some, like to Pope Francis and some of those things, is like they see him as stepping outside of that a lot of the time and saying like, this is the institution is not the thing to matter. Or how do I care for the person in front of me? How do I help the person feel
Yeah.
seen and known, loved? Like that kind of stuff
It's
all
the
really matters.
teachings, the values, the philosophy behind it all, right? Or
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like it's hard because you do it, and it like it without abandoning reason or rationality. There are certain things that exceed what we can communicate in words, and I don't mean that just in a religious sense. I mean, for people who understand, for Catholics who use the term religious sense, I do, but for everybody else, I don't, because we use that term differently. But like, the love that you have for your spouse, no amount of words you could put down on paper would adequately describe what that love is like. The relationship that you have with a best friend, no amount of trying to tell somebody about that will encapsulate the thing. And so, like, when I talk about being in love with the mystical tradition of the church, I do mean things that to a certain degree exceed what we can talk about or what I can even explain. But also, like, when you talk about how you love a spouse, if somebody who's ever experienced loving their spouse, they have an innate understanding and affinity for that that makes them immediately understand something about that love that you could never convey because they've experienced something similar to it. So the mystical tradition kind of like lives in that space of ineffability, of unspeakableness, of having to look into somebody else's eyes and just be like, yeah, Me Too, right? That's the space that like I really find that. And I also just I do love all the weird shit in the tradition also too. I love relics, and I love all the creepy gothic things that we do, like building churches out of skulls and other stuff like that. I think those things are all super fascinating, but
Yeah.
also oftentimes tied up in weird forms of colonization also too. So
Yeah. Well, I I grew up Catholic too, and grew up apart, and for a while I had really resentment, and now through talking to other people, and especially there is a comedian that grew up Catholic that I admire a lot and talks about it a lot in his stuff and his journey through uh, beyond Christianity. I don't know if you know him about
yeah,
Pete Holmes.
yeah, Pete's great. Like I could
Uh,
listen to Pete talk about religion and philosophy all day long. Like I love
yeah,
it. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, and I think I mean, I think there are people who are attracted to the institution or form of Catholicism are oftentimes attracted to the certainty that it proposes in some
yeah,
capacity, right? But that oftentimes leads to rigidity in a way that I'm not comfortable with, right? Because I think, more than anything, when I look at the person of Jesus, regardless of who somebody believes Jesus was, right? But if we just take the narratives that are presented about him
yeah,
at reasonable face value, right? The amalgam that's presented in the Gospels, then I don't see rigidity there, right? Like see the way that an individual is trying to call people forward into something more. And to me, I think people think that the form oftentimes or the way of doing that is the most important thing rather than really being convicted that being called into something more, like being called into something bigger. And I don't think you need to be religious to experience that call. I think you
yeah,
can do it in craft, right? I think you can do it in game design. I think you can do it in cooking. I think you can do it in your relationships. Um, I think that call into something more, into something greater, is the piece that a lot of times, like, people who are attracted to that certainty are oftentimes missing, right?
yeah,
Like they're just looking for something to grab onto because they feel like they're drowning a lot of time. And not exclusively. Like if you're listening to this and you're like, that's not me, I'm different. Great. Like I love that. I love that you're different. But I think we see it a
yeah.
lot. And
I
you know,
I had
I
that
was
difficult too because sorry to interrupt, but it's about
no, go
accepting
ahead.
something greater, and I am an atheist, and reading out, I have anxiety, and stoicism has helped me a lot, and it always mentions is accepting that a higher power, and I always mention the 12 step program, and then one of the steps people have the most difficulty is accepting that there's a higher power, and I always associated that with because of my upbringing as a Catholic, as this figure of God that controls everything and knows everything and loves you but will punish you, and that was really hard for me to accept. But just accepting that you don't control everything, that it's thing that's beyond you, and there is, even if this force is conscious or unconscious, that there's so much outside of your control that you just have to let go and just focus on what you can control and your opinions and your actions. I think that helps immensely, and that can be through God, and that can be through other ways of the letting go, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, even just to think about like future you is calling, right? Like, there's a audio drama that was like a Reddit like post called The Left Right Game. And I don't want to spoil anything too much about it, but it does this great job of just kind of unpacking like in this most horrific space, like what calls an individual forward. And to a certain degree, like, future Diogo, like whoever they are, hopefully is more capable, is a better parent, is a better friend,
Yeah,
is
hopefully.
able to do more in some capacity, not necessarily in every capacity, right?
Yeah,
And like for you to be able to be that person shouldn't. And I think this is one of the weirdest things we get hung up about. Like, and I do remember like the first time I met because I mean, I grew up in the South in Texas, right? So now like Catholicism is popular, but so is like Southern Baptist and other forms of fundamentalist Christians. Like I remember the first time I met somebody who was an out atheist, who wasn't like a punk and really desired to be like, what is moral and what is good, and to have conversations around philosophy. And that nowadays that sounds like that. It's a totally common thing. But in the you know 90s and early thousands, in the spaces that I operated and lived, it wasn't. And Dan was their name. Like Dan was such a, and I even like I remember turning to him in the back of Starbucks where we both worked and being like, I just really love that you and I largely agree about the way that people should be treated, what is and is not good. It has nothing to do with a religious sense. It just has to do with the fact that we are good people trying to do good for other
Yeah.
people. And he was like, yeah, because for him, it was kind of the same. Like most religious people just treated him horribly because he was an atheist. But like the me, like the Tony that's here right now, that like looks back at that Tony and is like, what a dummy. Like, what a dummy to think that this was somehow going to be a rare moment in your life, right? Or to think that because even if you don't intellectually believe like, oh, like people without religiosity can't operate in a moral sense, like when you grow up in that, it infects your brain in some really weird ways. And even if you don't ever say it, like you at some point have to kind of gut check, do I believe about that, right? It's all this kind of weird stuff that comes up in that. But I think in the same way, right? Like we get so trapped in our preconceived versions of somebody else based on a label, and then all of a sudden we have to be surprised by somebody who defies that. And I think we can either choose to like open ourselves up to, is my limitation, is who I am right now limited, and is this moment, this person in front of me, an opportunity to grow into something more, like this future version of myself, um or am I going to be utterly convicted by that? And this could also sometimes be manipulated and abused by people. So certainly don't let like horrible there's zero reason to be like, this person who's proven themselves to be a horrible fascist, I need to let them prove it one more time. That's not what I'm saying, right? But if somebody is telling you something about themselves and it defies what a label that you've assigned that person does you, I tend to trust what people tell me about themselves. Like and
Yeah.
sometimes that's not verbally, right? It's behaviorally, or it's in the work that they do. But like people tend to be telling you very clearly who they are and what they're about by the way that they present themselves to you.
Oh yeah.
And I think a lot of times we don't listen to that because we have frameworks that we need to kind of deconstruct that let us grow into more. And Dan was just one of the first major ones in my life. But they happen all the time. They happen. I mean, like it's a constant growth and growing process. But yeah, I mean, religion is generally speaking, I think, a really beautiful thing that people do really tragically horrific things with.
Yeah.
And so
And almost like anything humans do, like we can mm, do great things with it, and we can do terrible things with it.
yeah. I mean, it is
Yeah.
like it's kind of implicit in some ways, like the creative and destructive impulse, right? Like, I mean, in like the only way you or I get to put out an RPG in print is if a tree gets killed, right? Like, now we can put it out
Yeah.
digitally, but if we put it out digitally, then we're operating on massive
Yeah.
servers that
Yeah. It's
largely
also
largely
killing
burn on the
trees.
bones
Yeah.
of dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like like so either way, we've got to say, okay, look, in order for this creative impulse I have to live beyond me, something died also too, right? And there's just this kind of weird constant reality that we're confronted with of those two things, and learning how to do it without harming another person or the planet, or to reduce harm to those things, or to create more sustainable versions of it, like I think is such a challenge, because it feels so much easier just to kill something. Like,
Yeah.
we wonder why parties devolve into murder hobos, but it's because most dungeons reward you for killing the thing,
Yeah.
and then moving on.
Yeah. I said
And
to my
so,
son this week
yeah,
about it, it's we have so much stuff in the world uh, that's for destroying things, that we need to be creating more stuff for building and constructing things and you know, bringing things together again. Because like RPGs, I love adventure games. I love like murder hobo games and like adventures, killing monsters and stuff. But yeah, we should explore more about building, constructing communities, bringing people together, maybe making alliances and games focusing more about building stuff instead of, you know, just taking stuff apart.
Yeah. And you know, I think we've seen a lot of renaissance in that, right? Like, I mean, story games as a whole, even just deconstructing the power structures between GM and player, right? To create more egalitarian play spaces, GM-less games that give the players different types of narrative agency. You know, PBTA being, you know, not the first, but one of the first major one to kind of pop out and be like, you know, make maps, you know, leave holes. Well, we're inherently saying like, let's do a thing together. Let's create a space in which we're collaborating. You know, there's so many of those, along with games that explicitly like the goal is to build things. But even if you look at the ones like Icarus and oh man, I'm trying to think of all the world building games. Kingdom and starts with micro, can't think of the name of the game right now. Like all these different games where you're building a thing. A lot of times implicitly within them, it's like, and then we'll tell the story of how they fall apart also. Right. And it's interesting that there's not like games where we just get to spend a lot of time in the building phase forever and ever. Now we're always telling the story, so we're always building a thing, right? But there's something I think a lot of times where like we rush to when things go wrong, right? Because there's excitement in that space too.
Yeah, it's adrenaline, you know,
right.
You know, you have to fix something. But about building, it can be so much popular too. You see Minecraft, for example. Kids love Minecraft. You know, my kid is, I don't know, addicted. He only talks about Minecraft. And it even made me think about maybe making a game about Minecraft. And you could use like a square grid to build stuff and use like you know, colored markers, and each color maybe a material. And you could make maybe a craft quest game, you know, or something like this. And it's something that we can explore about crafting games, building games, and
and I think
making games people make.
Like, and I love like, so a big part of even what we did was like I always tell people my background's in pro-social gaming. So like I ran like low ropes and high ropes, which are like team building exercise, like trust falls and like problem solving games and other stuff like that. And a lot of those, like the only conflict you're exploring or the only person you're really trying to beat is typically yourself. It's like, you know, you might practice goal setting. So it might be like, hey, we've got to cross this river, real or imaginary. Here are the supplies we have, right? How quickly do you think we can do this, and how many times do you think we're going to fall in the river as we do it? And so then you sit down and you come up with a plan and you start working to execute that plan. And you might find out it was a bad plan and have to stop, or it might succeed, but it might take a long time. So then afterwards you can say, okay, you've done it once. You know, it took you 30 minutes and people fell in the water 4 times, right? Do we think we can do it with less people falling in the water, or do we think we can do it faster a second time, right? Is there a thing we can do to change in the plan? And a lot of times the only people you're competing against with are the past versions of yourself, right? The people who already did it. But there is no tension other than, can we do better than we did before? But that tension can really drive a group. You know, I've also seen people who can't overcome that tension and things just get worse the second time they try, and the first time was the best attempt. It's also interesting to process some of those things too. So, but you know, like those types of games are oftentimes not found, especially in like Western like culture. We're very conflict oriented in some ways, while simultaneously trying to tell people like, oh, conflict is bad, right? We're very, very conflict oriented, and I don't think conflict is bad. I think conflict can be great. But we really are bad at creating structures where collaboration is the thing that flourishes. And it's always really interesting to me to just kind of see that even in RPG spaces a lot of times. Like,
that was also going to ask, well, but RPGs are essentially collaborative. How do you see we're doing bad at this?
I don't think we're doing I think we're doing bad at this. I think out of all games, like there are some ways we can do this. I think if we are doing bad at this, it's in the culture of how we operate as a hobby industry.
That's true.
More so than it
That's
is
true.
around
Yeah.
the table. I think most of us would probably enjoy sitting around the table and playing games together. I think we can be really vicious to each other on social media and in our own
Yeah.
little groups, or if we don't like things that
Yeah.
happen. And you can even watch, like there are people who if we played a Magpie game on stream would be a little bit upset because Magpie is a big thing. So how
Yeah.
come we're supporting them, right? Or you'll watch somebody who all of a sudden everyone loves have a really successful project, and now all of a sudden everybody is second
Yeah.
guessing
Yeah. I don't
whether they're a
understand
good
that.
person or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I've never that's the place we're doing bad. But I think at the table
Yeah.
we're doing better and better at this. I think there are parts of the community that aren't interested in it, but I think as designers, like we really care about this, right?
Yeah.
I think we see that in like I couldn't tell you I could
We
count
need
on
to be
less than
more
a hand.
happy for each other. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, we need to celebrate more each other. I mean, it's great that Magpies get, but they weren't so big a few years ago.
No, like yeah.
Why all of a sudden they're villains? They're
And
doing
if the
great.
question is like you're just
Yeah.
upset because your Urban Shadows pledge hasn't
Yeah.
gotten to you yet, like I get it, but like come on, it's fine. But
Yeah.
I think about like we hosted the awards the other night. Congratulations on Cosmosaurs winning
Thank
an
you. Thank
award.
you.
What a beautiful experience, what a beautiful night.
Yeah.
Like and in so many ways, like I don't want to track through a ton of this, but like the first year of the awards was really good and did some really interesting things. And I really think Joe did a really great job of putting together a concept for a different type of award show. This is Joe DeSimone. There are some things that I thought ultimately were really bad that came out of it also, two very small things. But the cool thing was Joe wasn't able to keep on going. Nico and the organizing team picked it up, looked at the notes and said, here are the things we didn't like that we think can be better. Here are some things that were rough and hard. Let's tackle them. Let's get into them. Let's talk to the people who
Yeah.
they impacted. Let's have resolution, and not just for resolution's sake, but because people were impacted by some of these things, and figure out what works a little bit better. And this second year, like just 1 year in, to this award show, right? The Innies have been running for years. Can't figure out. I mean, I don't want to tear people down, but it's a large organization. It's super frustrating that they cannot figure out how to make the sound from videos come out on the screen at the Oscars of indie RPGs. It's frustrating. But we had a bunch. We were able to put together the stream. It was a great experience. And for me, like running it and sitting there and just being the host for it, right? It was just on our channel. And
Yeah.
but I definitely took host privilege and talked about it at the end, like hearing all those different judges from all over the globe, right? Not
Yeah,
just
that
not
was
just
amazing. Yeah.
Americans.
Yeah, that
Um,
was thing that I first noticed. I got there to watch, and it wasn't just people from the United States.
no, it wasn't. Like
Yeah.
it was, I mean, still probably a plurality of North Americans, but not I don't even know if it
There
was
are
a
people, yeah.
majority of judges, right? Like,
Yeah.
but hearing the different perspectives and hearing how games impacted people and having a judge say this, and there was a consensus, right? So even though a judge is saying this
Yeah.
is this one, right? Like all of the judges decided about the 20
Yeah.
games that made it to that. So there's
And they
a
were so
consensus.
diverse. The games were so
Yeah.
different from each other. That was great too, because sometimes we go to some popular awards and like the same game wins everything and everything. And then that, but now there was like so many different games and winning, and we can look of so how RPGs can be so different and so great and doing completely different things.
And there were games I hadn't even heard of until they got
Yeah.
announced. I mean, like I
Yeah.
saw them like the day before, right?
Yeah.
Like they were like I was like I had not heard of One Last Breath,
Yeah.
right? Like this is not a slight on them. Like there's no way for me to hear about
Yeah.
every single game,
Yeah.
but I had never heard of it, right? Like
Yeah.
Fedora
And we
Noir,
think we're well informed in games. We
yeah,
think we know a lot of indie stuff, and there was so much cool stuff there that
yeah.
I only seen briefly or never heard of, and was so incredible.
And like that's such a great like place of strength. Like we're talking right now, there's a lot of like the floating conversation of are there too many RPGs? Are there too many designers? Like that's such a weird
Are
conversation
there
to
too
be
many
had. Like,
movies? Too many
right. Like,
TV
are there too many
series? Too
movies?
many
Like,
books?
yeah. And so, and the question is like, are we helping people find their audience? Are we helping the audience find the games that they're going to love? Like, how are we doing those things? Because like, from a professional standpoint, maybe there are too many design, but like that's the same in every single industry and field. There are so many people out there who want to be actors who will not
Yeah,
be a Hollywood actor, and that's
yeah,
fine. It doesn't
that's
mean they can't be
fine.
fulfilled by participating in local theater, or maybe they'll realize, hey, I don't actually want to be an actor. I want to be a writer, or I don't want to be a writer. I want to be a cinematographer. Like, there's all these different modes of discovering engagement, and we have to start thinking beyond just like, I want to make games I don't like. It's one of the huge reasons. Like, so we just put out the other day. We're starting to recruit for a project we're going to be funding in February, right? Called To Live Beneath. It's an expansion for Down We Go. I'm very excited about it. I'm the primary writer on it. But by primary writer, that means I will be doing the executive editorial work, right, of building the book and putting
Yeah,
it together, and I will write about 30% of it, but the other 70-ish% of it will be written by probably a dozen plus different collaborators doing small little parts. And I love that because I want the game to be as have as many voices speaking into it as possible while creating, like, my job is to create a unified and cohesive expression, but I want a whole lot of other voices going into that process. I want things that are outside of me. I
yeah,
want different concepts to get in there, and to expand what this could be, and to give it to life, to like to breathe life into
yeah,
this thing. Want that, and I think that's so important. And even in the middle of that, like, there are some people who are writing narrative stuff. There are some people who are doing mechanical work. There are people who Ty Eldritch Mouse, who does the Mindstorm blog, right, did a set of procedures for Down We Go that didn't go into the original book that I loved, for kind of like how you manage an anti-canon, because they wrote this great article about it, and how you actually like document a living and changing world that is established as you play, and instead of really cool procedures around that. I wanted to put it in the core. Down We Go. Marcus was like, 80 pages is already too many. And so which is great because then you just make supplements later, right?
yeah,
But we have stuff like that that's coming into the book, and helping give it shape and form, and doing fun things in it. And I am super thrilled by that. And like, all of those parts, Johnny's going to do layout, right? Like, other people are doing art. We got killer art crew on it. Uh Keegan and Sarah will just be consultative. Sarah will look at it from the position of, what does this look like for a player who has never played this type of game before, right? Like, that's going to be this perspective that we ask her to kind of review it and approach it with. Like, we need a lot of different eyes and perspectives, both speaking into things, but also thinking about how we receive this, and ultimately helping it get out into the world, right? Like, from editors to other roles. And we have to start treating those roles all like they are equally important, because they all help make
yeah,
a thing happen. And that's, I think, one of the areas where it starts to let us be a lot more collaborative. It lets us start to enter into that creative mode more fully. You don't have to like everything someone else does in order for them to be, and I'd say it's even better if you don't, because then they will bring something unique to your project or to your table when they come to play. And it's great to draw lines around what is not okay at our table, and let people then say, oh, I really want to do that thing. Great. This is not the table for you, right? If
yeah,
you aren't gonna abide by the social contract, it's not us saying you don't belong here. It's you saying that's not the thing that I want. That's going, we totally get that. This is the thing that we're
yeah,
doing here in this space. If it's not for you, go somewhere else and do your thing. There's no moral judgment or dimension to that. It's just the things. Like,
yeah,
it's just what we're doing. Um, I think role playing games are really good at that when we let them be. And I think a big part of the problem is, for 20 plus years, 30 years, we had an industry that was dominated by kind of one version of doing things being the overwhelmingly most common way of doing things. And now we're seeing that kind of fragment and fall apart. But I think what's coming out of that is really just absolutely gorgeous. Like, thank goodness the Roman Empire fell apart, right? Like look at all the amazing cultures that were born once that version of weird
Yeah.
European colonialism died, right? Like, look at what happens when something becomes big and then falls apart, and people can say, what did we love about that, but where are we going with it on our own in the future? That's a really beautiful place to be in, and a really creative space to play around in. I think there's nothing that does that like RPGs. Like, literally, oftentimes we are sifting through the ruins of an ancient civilization, trying to say, what was this and how do we make sense of it for us right now. And I think there are games that have started to just lens into that really beautifully. Dialect kind of immediately comes to mind, even though it falls perfectly into that world building game, that but you also know it's going to fall apart. um Dialect is such a great exploration of, you're going to have the weirdest. Have you played Dialect ever?
No, unfortunately
It's
not
like
yet.
you build an isolated community, and then you develop slang for that community over a course of a
I
bunch of
know it's a
rounds.
language game, language
Yeah,
building
yeah,
game. Yeah.
yeah. And so, if you've ever watched like Clockwork Orange, right, and they're using all these weird like words that
Yeah.
they are definitions of in the book, if you go look in the back of the book, but it's hard to kind of initially take in. Um, you will be yelling at each other, having these massively impassioned conversations at the end of 3 hours of play in absolute gobbledygook, and you'll all understand exactly what the other person is saying. It's just a really cool mode of play that you're again and again you're building something in the middle of the world that's
Yeah.
falling apart around you, and you become invested and care about it. And so it's every single time I played it, there's this magic that happens where you just, if anybody who walked into that room heard you, they'd be like, this is absolute nonsense that y'all are speaking to each other, and you are screaming at each other about it, but you all are grinning and having the best time I've ever seen people have. What is this thing, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
and then it's gone, right? And the next time you play, it'll never be the same. And that's what I just one of my favorite things about that game, but also just that experience of creative play.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a perfect example of a weird game that we love talking about here. And it's something that I want to ask you about, and ask all the guests that come here, Tony, is how would you define weird, and why do you pursue it in your work and in the things you do in your life?
I had a theater teacher when I was in high school who looked at me because we did like some sort of like personality sorter or whatever. And I said, "Oh, I scored almost identically across all four sets." And this is not uncommon for me when I take personality sorters. And she's like, "Tony, you're going to be the kind of person who constantly finds that you score outside of the normal range for things in your life in a way that a book probably doesn't fully cover." And I don't know what that teacher looked at me and made me say that, because theater classes are inherently filled with weird,
Yeah.
but like looked at me and was like, you are going. And like, I mean, I also was, I was captain of the wrestling team and founder and president of the poetry club and on the theater, like I just did a bunch of different weird stuff that didn't always seem to align, because there were things I cared about and that I had fun doing. And I think when we talk about like what is weird, I think it's the people who have started caring more about being who they are than about how things will perceive that. I think that translates to art also too. Like, it's about letting a thing be what it is,
Be
without
authentic.
caring as
Yeah.
much about how
Yeah.
people are going to respond to that, right? Like a Van Gogh is beautiful because of the fact that it broke all the rules of art at that time, right? Like, and was vibrantly itself, and just didn't and Van Gogh didn't care about what anybody else thought about that, right? I mean, there's obviously internal struggles, tons of other issues that come up. I don't want to pretend like everything was just roses, but like
Yeah.
the importance was that the thing was able to be what it is, um, and that it didn't have to answer or fit into anyone else's definition of what it should be. And I'm probably broadly like, we're all weird, right? Some of us have just
Yeah.
come to kind of settle into it, in really beautiful ways. And when I look at the 20th anniversary of all those like high school folks who were seemed so normal 20 years ago, who have all been able to become the weirdos they always should have been.
Yeah.
Like it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful to see the weird folks that most of the people in that very homogenous, small, very white suburban town outside of Dallas eventually became. Even if you were one of the weirdos then, you
Yeah.
certainly are, you know, everyone's kind of a little bit of a weirdo now. So yeah, I think that ability to kind of be who you are, or be the thing without it, without worrying about what other people have, because there's a goodness in that that comes from just the truth
Self-love,
of the thing.
accept yourself,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um and I think like people argue a lot about like truth, and truth certainly has an inherent value to it, but like no one gets to tell you who Diogo truly is, and no one who gets to tell me who Tony truly, like I get to discover that, and I get to know that, and then I
Yeah.
get to share it with other people.
Yeah.
You don't get to tell me it is or
Yeah.
it's not, you know. I think it's one of the most beautiful things when we can just like start to be more open to
Yeah.
like, here is who this person is, and here's who they are telling me they are. And what if, rather than trying to change that or figure out how I feel about it, I just marveled at the beauty of the person who's presenting
Yeah.
itself to me? Or if it's a game, like, what if I just sat down and played it, even if the rules don't seem to make sense to me or be what I want to do? What if it's a painting? What if I just spend some time in silence
Yeah.
staring at it? If it's a movie, what if I just watch it? If it's a book, what if I just like, what if I just do the thing that this thing
Just
tells me what to do?
accept
And
it
right,
as it is, right?
right.
Yeah. Without putting
And
expectations for it to be something else. Like you think,
right,
like in RPGs, like people think, oh, RPGs is D&D, and you go play weird indie game, and it's not. It's obviously not D&D. And if you are not open to accepting that RPGs can be something else than D&D, and you might not take the full advantage of that experience. So that, and that opens for everybody else. Of being authentic as RPG, you don't have to try to be D&D. You can be
right,
authentic as a RPG designer and make that thing what it needs to be and it wants it to be, without needing to, oh, I have to make a game like this because that's what's popular right now, right?
right. And yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like somebody made the comment the other day about like making something for a system, and it didn't get much support because of the system. And I'm like, oh man, I've never even considered, like, and I get it. Like if you want to make something for a popular system, like the chances are, especially if that creator has developed a lot of support for how their stuff and their system gets amplified, that you'll see some reward out of that, right?
Yeah.
There isn't a whole lot that's interesting to me about that. And I say that as a system dev, like as somebody who makes systems. Like I love making that weird, freaky little new thing. Like I mean, I made a game about sentient appliances to process
Yeah.
childhood trauma around the brave little toaster, right? Like I mean, like I love that. I love the way that like Primal Quest leaned into totally new, like, you know, everybody was like it's really fun to just watch people be like, oh, it's so OSR, and I'm like, but is it? Because it's really story game also too. Like
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah. A
like
lot.
it
Yeah.
and you know like
I try to hide it. I try to hide it because
but
people are really, because it has a lot of fate in it. Has a lot of
yeah,
fate. And OSR people don't like fate because it's so open-ended. But
right.
yeah.
But they love what you did with it. Like, and that's
Yeah.
the thing. Like we have this idea, like I don't like fate, right? I
Yeah.
don't want to like, and so but like I love Primal Quest, and like, and you know, this and that and the other thing. Why do you love Primal Quest? Oh, because I love everything Diogo does. And so like the way that you were able to take a lot of that kind of fate DNA and work it into a system because of who you are, allowed people to all of a sudden open themselves up, because it was no longer tagged, right? Like
Yeah.
in it as fate, right? Like, but they're doing just buck wild story game stuff, right? And there's enough crunchiness for
Yeah.
the kind of like trad
I try to
mentality
make
or
it
the
a little
OSR
more
mentality.
grounded. Yeah, more
Yeah,
grounded and but also open-ended. So because I love
yeah,
that
but
both worlds can work really well together, I think.
and overwhelmingly, like I think we're seeing like that's what a lot of the designers that I really love working with, like regardless of which way they lean, right? Like whether you're Jay Dragon, or whether you're Chris McDowell, or whether you're Diogo, or whether you're Mamados, or whether you're, Aaron King, or Keegan, like people who I love they're so unconcerned with if something comes from a certain place, and
Yeah.
more like, what can I do with that thing,
Yeah.
right? And so like it's such a like really beautiful, vibrant thing to just see people grabbing stuff from all over right now and just trying to figure out how it all fits together in the game that they want to play and in the game that they want to make. And not worrying about, does this system do XYZ, but like, does this tool do what I want, right? Like,
Yeah.
and who are the people involved with it, people who I respect as creators, or are they just somebody who did a cool thing one time, right? Like those are all really interesting things that we're seeing kind of emerge, and this blend of like story game and old school play, and where those two things meet in things like Primal Quest and Down We Go and Into the Odd, and Carve from Brindlewood, right? Like Jason Cordova, who is somebody I absolutely adore as a designer, borrow narrative tech from all the time, very much like a story game designer who does the Fear of a Black Dragon podcast that talks
Yeah.
constantly about old school adventure and design and
Yeah.
the structures that help make it work, right? um these things all can meet each other and do really cool things in
Yeah.
in the space of play that we create in what we're doing. And I think it's such a blast when you get to watch somebody mix like some of the crunchier bits that you did with like Fate Core stuff, and have people just thrilled to it who would normally be like, oh, I'm not interested because of XYZ label, right?
Yeah.
And just accept it and dive into it.
Yeah, and I think it's has a lot of to do with that. As you learn new things, you can apply that to your own system or your own preference. And it's always that phrase that always comes to my mind, that from one thing learn a thousand things. So you can learn Fate, you can study all these games, and something will click there that you can use in your overstar games. I remember this monster I did for the folklore bestiary, that it's like an undead, a zombie here in Brazil. It's called dried corpse, or corpo seco here. That is basically, he's a zombie, but his basically his power is he's super evil. He's so evil that he went to hell, and Satan was like, "Fuck no, this guy is super
Go
evil.
back.
Send him back." So basically, his ability is every time he's taking an action, everybody at the table says the worst thing that he could do, and what he does is the worst thing about that everybody else thinks. So you have 5 players, everybody will have 5 worst ideas, and you as a GM will have an idea too, and you see what is the worst thing that he could do, and that's what he does. Because
It's so good.
and it's an OSR game. It's a bestiary for OSC. There's no new mechanic. There's just one ability. You do this, and it becomes a shared thing that it's thematically what he does. And you get this from other games, and you sneak it in a traditional, game from 1981. So
Right.
I
And that's,
love
yeah.
doing these things,
And so is,
subverting the game. Yeah.
yeah. And even like when, like we talk a lot about like stealing stuff from board games, right? Like
Yeah.
I just got my
Yeah.
BCC, the 100th project they did, which is like the spheres of whatever, because I can't
Yeah. I
remember the
need
name off the top of
this.
my head right now. I just got
Yeah.
it in. And like for me, my first experience, I played Sailors on the Starless Sea was the first thing I ever did for DCC. I love DCC a
Yeah.
whole lot. I love what it does, and I love watching people hack into it. But something I never knew until I went with Jared Crater to Hobonomicon at Gen Con just one night, and I walked into this room and people are like throwing dinosaurs at a ziggurat, and people are in another game as like slugs in hell, and people are in another
Yeah.
game caught in Saturday morning cartoons, but it's all actually one big game, and people are moving around from
Yeah.
table to table
Yeah.
trying to work their way up to that ziggurat to throw a hand of dinosaurs at some. I've never made it to that table, so I don't know
Yeah.
actually what you do there. uh but I've walked in, and it's like it's this very immersive space between a role-playing game and a LARP and a board game, right? And
Yeah.
but
And
DCC does like, it's not just books, it's these wild presentations of like very
And it's very
simple,
social too. The
visualized
whole
mechanics.
community is involved. It's insane. Yeah.
It's really crazy
Yeah.
to look at some of the stuff that they pull in from, and like, here's the thing, like, they're not presenting themselves as, look at how innovative we're being, or look at the
No.
great things. They're just like, what are we going to have a blast doing?
Yeah.
Like, what is just going to be so fun? We can't possibly stand it.
Yeah.
How do we take that and how do we put it in a box? Right. And I do think, like, Goodman Games doesn't submit themselves for award. They don't let
Yeah.
themselves be awards. They sponsor things, they do other stuff. They're not interested in that. What they're interested in is just singularly figuring out what is the most fun, weird stuff we could put in a box that kind of matches what we do, and just delighting everybody. And I think there's so many of us, myself included, who are caught up in, like, am I going to win an award? Am I,
Yeah.
I've got to
Yeah.
submit for this. How am I navigating the industry? Am I making the right connections? Am I marketing my game? There, all of which is stuff like we
Yeah.
do a ton of thinking around. And I'm like, but look at these people over here who are just
Yeah. A great example.
playing their game and making the thing the most fun they possibly could.
Yeah.
And look at them go. Like,
Yeah.
look at what they're
It's
doing.
incredible. And the support they do for the third-party community, and the third-party community promotes the game so much. And I remember the first time I went to Gen Con, I didn't know anybody. The DCC community just adopted me, and I can't forget it. I love the game. I love the community, and I owe a lot to Joe too. I sometimes talk to him and show him my stuff, and he gave me really good pointers both in my arts and in gaming. So yeah, DCC has a special place in my heart for sure. Yeah.
And it's just, it looks like it's dungeon crawling, but it's doing both as a company but also as a game. It's doing some really great stuff.
Yeah.
And it's unashamed of just exploring wild new spaces. And, like, I love that. I love what Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast is doing. Like, the fact that it is largely a narrative with these chapters. You're playing the cast of characters is ongoing, but the players change out all the time. And so, like, the only person who ever gets a glimpse of all of the chapters and the way that they work is the concierge, the person who keeps the book, like the owner of the game, gets to see how their version of the world opens up, but no one else will see it in the same way that they will. And you're putting down stickers and you're unlocking secret rooms and you're doing a lot of stuff that is pulled from kind of like video game tech and board game tech. And it's really, really amazing, mixed with like troop play, right? Like, but instead of it being like the troop is all the different characters you're going to pass around, which is a thing. It's also, well, the players are going to be different also too. And so it's flipped in like totally inverted that space. There's just a ton of that, and there's small creators who are doing the same thing, like Exient Press, right? They just won, or they got nominated for an Emmy. I was at an event with them in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I saw these box sets they're doing, and they've made these solo games that can just be played with the zine. But the box set has like a map and ways to move around the map with tokens and tracking where beasts are, or uncovering these new strange plants, like depending on what the game is. And they're very board game esque, right? They're taking really heavy things from board games and they're working them in some really intentional ways that are just breathtakingly sharp. And Exient doesn't worry about the space between board games and RPGs. Like, is aware of them, like, very smart guy, but and is very aware of kind of some of those divides in their player groups.
Maybe he's exploring the liminal space on purpose. Yeah.
Isn't intimidated by that. That's the space he wants to design in. And so he's designing in that space and doing really great work there. Like, I mean, like, there's just there's so much of that. We just started talking to somebody who thinks we have a game of theirs we're going to print. It's been out for a while yet, but I didn't realize the entire game had been designed to be printed as a comic book, right? And so we're looking at the numbers to see if we can just fit it in a Zine Club early next year. It's a superheroes game. It's very Watchmen kind of inspired in both the art, tone, and play.
Nice.
And we're going to try to print it as a comic book instead of as a normal zine, right? Because, like, that is the intent. And it's not even a game question. It's a format of, can I produce this as a comic, right? Like, and what a comics do as a medium that RPGs don't do, and how can it do this? And the question is just something that the creator is like, I have this great idea for a thing that I think would be beautiful to make. That would it's yeah, it's weird. It's not what everybody else does, but I want the thing to just be. I want the thing to be what it is supposed to be, and I can see that as the creator being able to bring that to the forefront. Like it's so huge. And I love just uncovering those gems. And then we love helping get them out in the world.
Yeah.
The Wassailing, which is live on Kickstarter right now, that we're doing. Mike and Brian and Michael and Joseph, who's my brother, who I am starting to get to work with on game stuff now because he's a musician who did a ton of work in experimental music as part of his doctorate trajectory, is doing music for it. And it's just the creepiest, most horrific stuff. It's all based around Christmas. It's like Mike Flanagan TV show meets a Rankin Bass cartoon, right? Like it's just totally mind-blowing, really cool stuff. It was just a brainworm Mike had over years. But it's such a piece of art in a way that nothing I've ever worked with or on is. And that's not to dismiss anything we've done before. It's just they are thinking about things on so many levels. And the fact that like the art was go ahead.
What's the weirdest thing about it that you really comes to your mind, like your favorite weird thing about the
so project? And we haven't done a good job of highlighting this yet. So there are all kinds of great weird things about it narrative, but the art is a mix of like vintage stock art and like 2 foot by 3 foot wood block prints hand carved by Brian Sago, who did butter prints. So it's literally, this art was like a year in the making because Brian, like with a small little knife, made thousands and thousands and thousands of grooved cuts on every single piece to help create a single print at a huge volume that we're putting down into the book. And they are mind-blowingly evocative of both Christmas and absolute terror in the way he has executed them at the same time. Like they are so good. And they're not the best part of play, but they are definitely, I think, the part of the book that people are going to pass over and not realize the intensity of care that went into this, like the literal sweat, tears, and blood, because Brian has cut himself a couple times, that went into doing that work. But then Mike is going to take and put into this intensively beautiful. Like Mike is such a master. Even what we're talking about right now, Mike is the lead writer and lead designer on it. Is Mike Martin's Clear Keep Games. The layout that's going into this thing, like Mike is somebody who is constantly preaching like follow, like do what your text needs, not what your industry does, right? Like don't worry about what other RPGs do. Like what does your text need in order for it to be given life, right? Like from a layout perspective, from a user design standpoint, from how people are engaging in it. I say this, we are publishing it. I obviously have a vested interest in it being successful, but it's a weird Christmas game that we launched, which means people are only really going to play it once a year. That we launched at the worst time of year to launch a Kickstarter. It's funded, like we're fine, and we're fine with it just funding. Like I think we can get to $10,000 or whatever and unlock a couple stretch goals, and we really want to, but like whatever. We're all very excited. We're gonna get to make the thing. But like the layout he's doing on it is just mind-blowing, and it doesn't look like any other book. He's using way more negative space. He's giving the text room to breathe. He's letting an image really stand on its own. But the other really weird thing about it, so I mentioned my brother. We worked with him on Duckborg. He was a Flash funding goal. He did some dungeon synth. It was like inspired by some of Chris Bassett's music and DuckTales theme song. So, but it was like this metal. We only did 90 seconds for this one. Like we did 2 songs. They're designed to be looping ambient stuff in the background, and one's like "Here We Go a Wassailing," which is like a classic public domain carol. The other one is "Jingle Bells," but like imagine Jingle Bells, but like drop like detoned and distorted, and sometimes instead of ringing bells, there's clanking chains, like, and you start to get a little bit of a sense of what the music is doing as just a world building thing. And then the last just really weird thing about it is um um Michael Van Vliet, Signal Station, um did some additional writing for it and did like the rooms and kind of brought in some Bluebeard's Bride kind of writing style, where each of the rooms kind of features a mix of this really gothic and horror, these kind of intense horror elements of an old kind of like estate manor, but has all these touches of lust and desire and sensuality kind of like saturated through them. So like, why is there a leather paddle that says like daddy in next to Santa's bed? Like, when you go into the parlor, there's the broken glass of a bourbon snifter lustily thrown into the flames, and blindfolds draped over an ivory elephant, right? Like these really kind of evocative small details that create a sense of drive and desire that I don't think players would necessarily naturally bring to the table. And it's just really, it's been like creating the physical space of the Claus Manor where all this happens, like, has been really intense also. And we're not even like touching on like mechanical design, which is all really cool and does some really great things with trophy and blah 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 blah. But like, I cannot express that I hope that we make art like this in the future. And I'm the kind of person, when somebody's like, do you think game design is art? If the person who's designing it thinks it's art and is approaching it as art, it's art. I'm never gonna tell somebody it's not art. When I think about making games, do I think about them as art? No, I think about them as toys. Like, I'm making a toy that I want it to be played with in a certain way or to do certain things. And I don't think about that as art, even though I think there's the writing is art and the art is art, the design is art. I don't think about it that way. But this is a thing that is just, as I look at this stuff, and was one of the biggest things for me to wrap my head around as the publisher, is like, this thing is a work of art. Like, it is going to be one of the most gorgeous things we've ever produced. And that is on every level, like physical, digital, auditory, like, like, it is, I don't think we're sticking anything you can eat or smell in the box, but like pretty much every other sense is being directly engaged. And it's also not me. Like, it's this great team of folks that I get to just be like, let me take care of the shitty stuff you don't want to do. And yeah, like, like, part of the goal is like, we just want to turn it around as quickly as possible. So like, it'll digitally release to backers on like the 3rd of December, and then we're gonna send it out. The goal is that it ships on January 6th, which is Epiphany, right? So it's like the actual end of the season.
Yeah.
And so like, our goal is that we just kind of start at the beginning of Advent with releases, and then the whole thing is out the door to people by the end of Christmas, so that then they can play it next year. If we hit a certain stretch goal, there's something that comes out on Candlemas, so we have an extra month, but that's all the extra digital content. But it's just this gorgeous work of art that I'm like enthralled by. I mean, Adam Voss's games, World Champ Game Co., like, everything they do is so drenched, right? Like, so many things out there. I just look at it and I'm like, this is art. This is the first time I've ever gotten to be in the middle of one of those projects. It's been super fun.
Hello weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me! I just released a new game called Cosmosaurus, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a runes-light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfuneral.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat. Tony, do you have any ritual for like starting creating stuff, starting working on your art, or like when you sit down to make your show or to, start streaming? Do you have anything that helps you get to the moods to start working?
Yeah, I am going to respond to one of my children real quick. Hold on. Because they are asking if they could stay late at a friend's house, and I told them they had to be home at a certain time. What's that?
Yeah.
Is fine. I'm going to tell them it's okay. So a ritual for how I start my art. No, probably to my detriment. I mean, do I have ones that I've found to be really fruitful in historically? Yeah. Lately my best writing. So I just started managing a coffee shop as we kind of transitioned back to being an independent organization. It was a way to just make sure we could financially support our staff and the projects without having to worry about saddling a salary for me on top of that as we, move back to an independent status. And I love working in coffee, and I love the organization that runs that helps people who are in recovery or coming out of justice involvement to get their first job back. And so I love what I do there, but it does mean that most days I go in and I walk to work. It's about a 9-minute walk, and I will typically listen to a podcast on the way there. Something oftentimes RPG related, not always. But I was listening to like Ben Lawrence's like Into the Mega Dungeon for the last little bit, and just really enjoyed that. Kyle Latino's Map Crow, like, I'll just listen to something other creators, this podcast, and so like we just to kind of just hear what other people are talking about. Then I'll turn that off. I'll get there. I'll start doing some work. And then there's usually about a quiet hour where we will have maybe one customer during that time, and during that hour, I'll just pop my laptop out. I will pour a cup of coffee. I usually do like a cafe au lait. And I will sit and I will drink that cup of coffee, and I will get, about 500 good words done. I'll get more than that down, but I'll get 500 good words written out. And because what we do, and even part of the art of what I do, is all those kind of sinew pieces. Some days it's not that. Some days it's like, hey, there are 5 emails that I've been sitting on because I want to give them the time and the attention they deserve, and not just like be like yes no, here's this, let's set it, but actually respond to somebody. And so, but sometimes I'll pop one of those up and spend 30 minutes like drafting a considered email because I might have read somebody's game who we're looking at for publication, or we're looking at doing coverage for, and I want to give them some feedback on it. Or it might be about logistics at the warehouse, or all kinds of stuff. But like that hour and that behavior and mode of being really has become in recent years, or in recent months, the most fruitful time. I had about a year of just not having any time to write, plenty of ideas. I could jot down a few notes, but no real writing took place other than a little bit of through the void work. And so having that hour of the world is dark and I've got a cup of coffee and I just took a walk and I've done a few physical things today, so my body's awake, but my mind is still kind of in that half space between sleep and awake. We got some real good words down in that time, and that's become my current kind of ritual that I'm seeing the most fruit out of for creative work.
That's usually about what time? You said you walk to the work to work, and you when it's slow there,
Oh,
you ride
this
there.
is
Yeah.
like this is 5:30 in the morning is
Okay.
when I leave my.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be at work at 5:30, but I'm also the boss, and so no one looks at the time clocks but me, and it only takes
Yeah.
me 20 minutes to get set up. So I leave
Yeah.
here around 5:30, get there around 5:40. 6 o'clock is 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock is usually that golden hour. So for part of the year here, that's dark completely. For part of the year here, that's mostly dark, and the sun might be starting to peek out at the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the world is still mostly asleep. And the only people who come in to bother me, who aren't bothers at all, are the teachers who are on their way to school who just need their coffee before they head in. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's been good. And so that's my current kind of creative ritual space.
Yeah, and it's quite very common among artists and creatives to work very early in the morning before everybody started getting, or sometimes very late at night when everybody just went to bed and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
how
miss when that was my creative
yeah,
ritual time. I loved working late at night. I do not. I mean, I'm a morning person, but
it's
I
much
love.
healthier being a morning person,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
It is it like yeah. I you have more spoons at that point of
Uh,
the day, but I do miss when I was up late every night. This when my kids were younger, so kids would go to bed, and then I would have like 3 hours at night of like, oh, I
yeah.
can sit and work and do stuff and just, write or type or get projects done. But it's also almost always in that kind of like the sun is about to come up or the sun is about to, it has just set space that I find to be the most helpful for me.
And how did your kids growing affected like your time to work on your creative stuff as you were in the beginning? My kid is 8 years old, so that's what I normally do now. I work on my stuff before people wake up, and after
Yeah.
everybody here goes to bed. So
People used to ask me how I got so much done.
yeah.
And I used to tell them, oh, it's really easy. I could be a better father. And they would like laugh. And I would say, it's really not funny. And they would be like, oh, and
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I mean,
I
now that's,
understand completely
but
for
like,
sure.
that's because I would
Honestly, yeah.
travel or it was stuff I couldn't
Yeah.
co-do with them or, all those different things like, and I way more involved as a parent than my dad was. And then, than a lot of dads are. So
Yeah.
like, I don't want to project that I was a bad father, but like, when I see like you playing with your kid, like making notes about like, hey, we played this with the kid today, like the games that you'll play with your child and then make notes on, like the stuff for Sword Quest and everything. Like that's one of my favorite things to see other people doing. Um, and I have one child who is super into RPGs, and I have a bunch of kids who cannot play games with each other without it turning into yelling or screaming. Because we have four kids who are relatively
Yeah.
close in age. So like lots of times it was like, there's no agreement about what everybody wants to do. And so you're kind of rotating through what any one person wants to do. And I am very lucky that my kids were always fairly willing, at least when I really wanted to play games or to do other stuff as a family, and be fairly into it, except for when it became very clear that someone, oftentimes me, was going to win. And then people would get upset. Not necessarily that they weren't winning, but that they were losing. And so we have a couple of people who don't handle loss very well in the
Yeah.
household, which I'm not one. I love it when my kids beat me. But I am the kind of parent who's like, I don't go easy on my children because I want them to feel the satisfaction of knowing they actually have defeated their father at some point in time. Which, like when we play Super Smash Brothers or like other things like that, it's great because I don't play as anywhere near as often as they do, but I can still get in and like trounce them pretty soundly from just years of muscle memory. But when they pull out a win, like they're super excited about it,
Yeah.
like same thing with board games or other things like that. They love to beat me at the thing. We used to have a thing called Dad Kwando, which was literally just me grappling them and not letting go of them. And if they could escape in a certain period of time, they won. They got awarded different ranks. But it was just wrestling, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you know, they have had probably the biggest influence on any kind of creative flow out of anything in my life. Like I always tell people, like, people are like, oh, well, once I'm married, I was like, being married impacts things tremendously, but like
Yeah.
having children is a totally different type, because like a spouse or a partner can take care of themselves for the most
Yeah.
part. Like, a child can't. You have to go to bed early to make sure you're up to get your kid to school. You have to stay up late because they're sick or they need help with homework. You have to
Yeah.
take the time to do the thing. And it is more like, even if I have a game in me that will last for decades after I die, none of those games will be as important
Yeah.
as the decades of life my children will have without me. Or if souls exist, then the potentially eternal nature of a human individual, right? So like that's such a higher importance than anything else we're gonna be doing. But I'm not always good about stopping that thing and giving my children the attention they need also too. So I mean, like
I
I
relate to
experience
that a
that so
lot.
heavily.
Just to let you know that, as you said, like a bad father, I remember like during the early pandemic, like in 2020, I wrote 5 games. But like I was super anxious. I was getting like away from my kid, from my spouse, and we're really in a bad place. And as you said, like how did you make so much? And you said like being a bad father, and that immediately came to my mind. And now I'm much better, much more centered. I spend I make sure I spend time with my wife and my kid, and then being present. And that's why I write before they wake up or after they go to bed. Or sometimes I have time in between this stuff too.
Yeah.
But uh, making sure we spend time with the people we love. It's like so important too, because I think even my games, when I'm feeling better, I'm connected with those people. I can make maybe better games, more connected games. That's build on that thing we're talking about, like games that connect people, that build instead of destroying things. So I think it's way more
Well,
balanced. And in what you said, like no game will be more important than that connection we have with the people we love.
and it was really funny. Like one of my kids is like, can I come to PAX Unplugged, because I want to come to PAX Unplugged, right? Which is coming up next weekend. The another one was like, can I come help set up your booth for PAX Unplugged? Because I think it would be fun to go, but I also really did love coming to conventions with you a couple of times and just helping get things set up and seeing how things operate. And like, I mean, one, why am I going to pass up free labor? But two, why am I going to pass up time with one of my kids who's
Yeah,
interested in doing a thing that I care about and is supportive for me? And so like, my this is my second oldest, right? Who's helps moderate our Discord, and helps me not have to learn how to use Discord as well as I probably should know how to. Like, I mean, I can operate it as an individual, but just like structures and bots and all that.
yeah,
He helps do all that stuff. But he's also a just tremendous artist in his own right. Like my kids are all very creative. Most of them draw or sketch or do something that
nice.
is a fine art outlet. He's tremendous, does great digital art. We're gonna have him support a couple of projects this year. But like it's fun to help kind of coach him on like starting to take commissions and what should he be asking as an artist. And like not enough artists ask about usage or about rights for an image, and most creators are happy to have them not clarify that, and a lot of other things, right? And so just being able to say like, here are the things you should ask, like decide how much any of it's worth to you, whether you really care about owning the copyright to this or whether you want to sell it off,
Yeah,
right? If you want usage considerations given in very specific ways, right? And any answer to those questions is a fine answer as long as you've thought about it, right? Like I want you to have just given it that attention, and then give your dad a deal whenever he needs art done. That's the other thing that you have to do. But we've got a couple projects this year we're going to work him into, because I also just want him to start seeing he's 18 years old, starting to navigate the world as an adult,
yeah,
and like having him be able to have a few projects he can get on, their creative projects, to build, to work as part of a bigger team, to get that. It's so huge, and I'm so excited about kind of having him in that space. But it's really interesting. You go from like hoping your kids are going to be interested in your stuff to realizing they are or are not, and then eventually having them come back around and want your help with different things.
yeah,
And it's really been fun to, as somebody who supports a lot of other creators, be able to then do that with my own children in different ways also too. which, I mean, the goal is to not just turn all of my relationships into, my wife is my boss at the coffee shop. She's director of operations for all the restaurants. So the goal is to not just only have professional relationships with my loved ones, but to have actual relationships also.
But I mean, the work you're talking about is like meaningful work. It's not like the work we do just for money. It's work that speaks to who we are and how we express ourselves. So I think I would love to work with my kid on RPGs. Like I play test some of the games with him, and he's making his own stuff. Like I have this character sheet that's a game he created. I don't fully understand it, but I play with him and stuff, and I think it's fantastic. It's something that we watch him make, and he's copying and he's creating stuff. Because one thing that I'm really worried about kids, especially my kids, is like the passive entertainment, like just staying watching stuff and not making and not creating. And then because I of course I love it to watch my stuff, but time was so limited. I just had this time to watch this, and then it's over, and then I have to make my own, entertainment. I had to entertain myself, and now it's so easy to not entertain yourself. There's so many ready-made, and I have a hard time with turn out the TV. Let's make something. Let's entertain ourselves, and then
yeah. Kids are great. And if you don't have kids, that's also fine. But I mean, I would say if you don't have your own kids and you like kids, like go get involved at the library. Like if you're creative or you're a weird person out there, like weird kids are looking for weird adults who are comfortable being weird. Like I'm really lucky to have a great local creative community. Like I know I mentioned a bunch of like bigger designer names along with some smaller ones, but like Jay is a very good friend of mine who lives in the same city as I do, and we spend time together. And I am thankful for the presence of Jay Dragon in my children's life, as a model of a creative person where I love, but just also as an adult friend who is invested and will ask them questions about their own personal pursuits and creative work. Like kids need other adults who are going to invest in them and ask them questions and be there for them. And so if you are not somebody who ever wants kids of your own, that's totally fine. Go find a weird kid somewhere that you can invest in a little bit at some point in time.
Yeah, for sure. You talk about so many people here, so but do you have any artist or any creator from maybe outside of the hobby that inspires your work or the way of thinking or the way of making things?
Yeah, like so as long as we establish that all these people come from a certain time, lens, and perspective, and that not every necessary view that they have is reflected in my own. Frank Herbert and Isaac Asimov are two of the earliest authors I just fell in love with. I was a huge sci-fi kid. And Herbert's Dune series, especially, like I'm such a Dune. Like I said, I discovered Dune because I read every book in my house as a kid. As a kid who was oftentimes too young to necessarily have the social emotional intelligence to understand what I was reading. I read the Dune series, the first 4 books, for the first time when I was in 6th grade, and I loved them. I loved everything about them. And anybody who has read the Dune series will catch that. Yes, that was the first 4 books. and I did eventually read all of the books in the original series, and I really enjoy all of them. I reread them probably every 2 years through most of high school and college. Just a series that I thoroughly enjoy, and am always interested in what Herbert was doing with lore in a lot of really loose ways. Like it's a universe that has a lot of really interesting just kind of tidbits scattered through with some of the different like quotes at the beginning of each chapter that do some really good implied world building. The way the narrative kind of flows in and out of different perspectives, the wild range it goes on. But I also am just a Dune junkie. Like I read the prequel sequels written by his son and Kevin J. Anderson also, and I like a lot of them, even if I don't think the writing style is great. It was fun to see where they went with some of that, and what Frank had planned for some of it, at least, also too. Asimov, the thing that always just blew me away is Asimov basically writes a contained universe. Like, even in books that are short stories, not every single thing, but a lot of it. His anthologies, his major works, all essentially take place in a centralized universe and timeline, some of which is extrapolated later, right, into being a thing. But the Foundation series, which isn't the first bit of Asimov I read, but really caught me when I was probably a sophomore. Um, I just thoroughly enjoyed, right? Sci-fi writers from that period of time, though, are toxically misogynistic, but I think, and there's a lot of bioessentialism, especially in Asimov's work, that is really interesting. But Asimov actually is even exploring concepts of gender and sexuality that aren't necessarily at the forefront of anyone's dialogue at that point in time. And those sexualities explored a lot in science fiction. Um, you don't get it as much gender theory that early on, and so there's some just really interesting pieces in there that I don't even know that Asimov knows what Asimov is doing, but there's some really great conversation to be pulled out. I'm actually a pretty big fan of C.S. Lewis. Like, not just Narnia, but some of the other stuff that he does. He's a way looser writer than Tolkien is. You know, it's gonna mostly be authors, by the way. I'm a words guy. But I think if you know, for me, the person who writes stuff that's spirituality adjacent, who is a fiction writer who is the best, is just Gene Wolfe. Gene Wolfe is just mind-blowingly good, and somebody I didn't discover until I was a full-on adult, and just really love Wolfe's ability to step outside of his own moral and theological structure to explore things from an objectively human standpoint and still bring those themes to bear. Like, I'd never known anybody who has been able to write so dislikable a main character for some of their books, that you want to still see become something more, and that you as the reader are supposed to be aware that this is a bad person and that you're still going to kind of root for them. I'm trying to think if there's some others that there's just really, like, I used to just buy quarter, like, old sci-fi books from the library. Like, anytime they had cool, weird pulp sci-fi, I would buy it and read it. So Howard, you know, other folks like that. So yeah, I mean, like, I was huge into fantasy and science fiction specifically. Um, uh, from a music standpoint, The Offspring is the only The Offspring and Art Garfunkel, not Simon and Garfunkel. And Art Garfunkel, I just really love his vocal styling and the song selections that he puts in his anthologies. He's not a great writer or musical talent, other than he's just got a voice I dig and a style that of curation that I really love, which probably makes me feel really resonant with him. And The Offspring, you know, to take classic operatic vocal skill and apply it to, I wouldn't call it pop punk, but pretty pop punk adjacent, especially by the end. I just really loved the words that The Offspring, but on the tone with which they did it. It's probably some of the only music that I really have strong resonance to. Whatever part of the brain really appreciates music, mine is deficient. I can appreciate it, but I don't create emotional attachments to music, for the most part. I don't know, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's
That's a lot of
great.
things.
Yeah, and as you talked about it, it kind of made me trace some parallels to gaming, and you talked about world building, and a lot about these authors has to do with this, and even like the implied setting, or make it very contained in Corsair's universe as Isaac Asimov, and making these characters that they're bad, like making interesting characters, NPCs, and has maybe informed a lot of your work. And
yeah,
I love Offspring. I mean, it's punk rock and was some of my first bands I remember when I was starting to listen to music, I didn't know much about it, and I asked for a friend of mine, and I was watching MTV at the time, and two big bands were like hitting there, Backstreet Boys and The Offspring. And my friend, no, get The Offspring,
Sure.
but he asked me to buy the Ramones actually, but I went to the CD store and I saw the Ramones, which now is my favorite band of all time. But I saw like this dorky dudes with like jackets, looking real weird, and The Offspring was like this, the Smash, this Red Skull. Oh, Red Skull, fire! That's what I'm getting, of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, I think probably the other major through line for non-RPG creators and creatives would like be like Kerouac and Ginsberg and a few of the other like beat poets were pretty influential for me, and lived in my back pockets for years. But mostly like Ginsberg's ability to just play around with language in a way that was so expressive. And I think Kerouac's narrative style and deconstruction of the American experience. And even like some of the earliest reading I did on like essentially what we would kind of come to understand as like harm reduction within drug culture of like are drugs only meant for the abandonment of will or oblivion, or is there something more in this space in a way that I think a lot of people a lot of older people dismissed as like pseudo intellectualism, but that now we've really come to understand like this is a really authentic expression of use culture. Not that they were like everything was drugs, right? But like there's a lot in there that really kind of informed an early understanding of like, for lack of a better term, the moral realities around drug consumption. And that you can consume drugs and not be a bad person. I feel like if I hadn't read Beat Poets, I would have probably made it through the end of high school um with a way more distorted view of human sexuality and I did if I did. And I think that's pretty important. That's pretty important part of kind of who I was then and also the person that I eventually became. Because it creates a sense of like there's a sense of openness to experience that's found in that time frame of American poetry that is wild and untamed in a way that is authentically American, but largely only in a good way. And that's very rare for me to quote that something is American and only feel positive about it. Mainly because they didn't just stay in America. They traveled a lot. And so anyways, yeah, that's probably the other kind of core piece that that wasn't just science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. And then now talking about more personal things that we're starting to get into about this influence. And you talked about this vision about seeing people that use drugs, because I think our society is very drug based. Like we drink coffee, beers, and people smoke, or even like people have a small headache, they drop a pill and etc. And we see drugs in very different ways. Some drugs as something very common, some very bad. And then how is your relationship with I ask people about mind altering experiences, and did you have any experience with this kind of drugs that lets you experiencing reality in like different ways, even psychedelics, or even cannabis, or
Yeah.
everything else like this?
My brain chemistry, like I can get high and I can drink and I can do a lot of other things, but like um I thought my friends were like always joking around about the impact of like pot and other stuff on them. And what I came to realize later on from a bunch of different things is that my brain chemistry just doesn't like I'm not super susceptible to like I can get drunk like and I have but like like drunkenness will last for me typically about 30 minutes and then I won't be back to full faculty, but I'm like, there's no sense of,
Yeah.
or I'm not as super attracted to losing my faculties either, but like, when I'd smoke pot with friends, like they would be wasted and I would be like, I'm fine. Like I have no idea what's happening. I tried a couple other things, but nothing ever made me be like, this is a thing, this is a sensation that I'm really excited about or that I want or that whatever. Like
Yeah.
and there was no real moralization around it. It just didn't do a lot for me. And
Yeah. It
I
doesn't do for everybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Of course.
overwhelmingly enjoy a sober conversation. By sober, I just mean clear-minded, right? Like
Yeah.
if somebody in the party has been drinking or is in other way, shape, or as long as everybody's clear-minded and can largely recall the broad shapes of the conversation the next day, like I would consider that a sober conversation about things that matter. Um, than I would about than I would to try to bring like any sort of substance into those things. And that's just a thing about me. Like sitting around and getting buzzed, whether that's pot, whether that's, you know, alcohol, whatever. But I also have come to realize more and more like a lot of people don't have the ability to self-regulate because it does have a strong impact on them in a way that it doesn't on me. And so like especially as somebody who works in a lot of recovery circles now with a lot of people who have
Yeah.
substance
Yeah.
abuse issues, like like being more mindful of those things has been really big. But you know, I find I find sex far more mind blowing than drugs. And I think that the intoxication of a great conversation is one of the most thrilling things. I find that substances usually get in the way of that and don't usually enhance it in my experience. Now, again, other people, I can look at
Yeah.
history and
Yeah.
see the broadness that other people have had totally
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
experience, but it's just never been my thing.
Yeah. Of course.
But you know,
Mhm.
like I you know, will I at Gen Con take edibles with a bunch of other designers and sit around and also have a great conversation for an extended period of time? Yes, but they're also ones that are largely designed for a body high and not a body
Yeah.
high. So we're still
Yeah.
able to like so that I mean, like that's the thing. Like I'm far more into like what's the conversation we're having while we're doing this.
Yeah. Of course. But
And
sometimes that helps some people get a little looser. Like I for me,
100%. And
for
that's
anxiety is a little big thing for me, and
yeah.
sometimes these things help me slow down to actually be able to have more deep conversation because with anxiety, my mind will be something else, and then I won't be as present as I could be, and
Well,
then
and there's the social and enjoyable experience of a lot of an intentional loss of control with people who you really desire to be in that space with. Um and the celebratory we at Gen Con this last year, we got out for dinner with like the Soul Muppet folks and the Stockholm Cartel
yeah,
crew and Marcus Linderum, who's a Down We Go's designer,
nice, yeah,
and Cassie Mothwin. And we had gone over to like the hotel that everybody goes to at night, and somebody was like, oh, do y'all want Malort? And I was with a bunch of Swedes, so they wanted Malort, which is a super bitter, like, you know, liqueur that is very popular in Chicago. um I love it. Everybody talks about it like it's horrible. I think it's delicious, but I love bitter things. And um there was a moment where we had done 3 or 4 shots, and after every single one, Johan or Pella or Marcus would start a Swedish drinking song, which are very much like a thing you do while you drink Malort. And so like, but that moment of like singing and
yeah,
drinking in quick succession and getting buzzed and the loss of cohesion and just being in that moment that it creates is also just a really cool
yeah.
thing with these 2 folks from Chicago who are just big Malort fans and so had brought a bunch of it and
And becoming
no
part of something
no
bigger
connection,
too.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that transcendent reality where, you know, at the same time, like if I come into a situation and people are already intoxicated and it's evident, it's almost always an immediate turn off to me because it's the
yeah.
same thing.
It's
You
yeah,
feel like you're on the outside of
yeah.
something.
Exactly. Yeah,
And And so those things can be really interesting and really complex, but overwhelmingly, like, I don't place a lot of,
Yeah.
like, I like to be reasonably in control. And not, I don't have control issues. Like, I don't find like that type of loss of control particularly enjoyable unless we're intentionally
Yeah.
going there in a safe
Yeah.
space over time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I confess for me, it's not really about the loss of control. It's more about the connections and sometimes being more present in the perceptions, you know, and the way you feel stuff, you know.
Yeah. But it was really interesting to discover, like, oh, like, the rest of you literally are high, and I just can't get high on pot. And I
Mm.
really, like, I mean, part of this, like, I
Yeah,
am a big guy. Like, so some of this is just size, some of this is brain chemistry. Like,
yeah.
a lot of things just
It
don't hit
works
me
different
very
from
hard.
different people. Like edibles for me it doesn't do very much, you know,
Right.
and for my wife, she gets like really,
Yeah.
you know,
And
weird.
so,
But so something else about I want to ask about these states of altered perception. You talked about sex is a much crazier high. And
yeah,
do you have?
sex is way more exciting for me
Yeah.
than anything
No,
else.
what I'm
Um,
asking is any other states of altered states of awareness that you might have reached maybe with your spirituality, maybe with meditation, maybe with
yes,
hypnosis, maybe even with tantric sex. I don't know. Have you ever reached
I've
any?
never tried tantric sex. I I almost just overshared in a way that my wife would be upset if I did, so I stopped myself. Um, uh, the um, uh, the yeah. So for me, like, altered states comes a lot from. I mean, I do think there's a level of just like the lust and desire for another person, like being in love, being consumed by the idea of another person, I think is one of the most enjoyable altered states that there is. I I I think, and not just lusting, but I think it is best when there is a deep visceral
Connection.
desire for physical, like, carnality involved in some way, shape, or form. Um and I think that's how most of us experience it. And then I think it's fun to peel that back and to start to discover what it means to be excited by another person when it's not sexual, right? So I think when you can experience that with somebody who ideally returns it, right? Like, who you can feel secure giving yourself over into just that
Yeah.
transformative desire for them. I think there's something so good about that. I think part of it is we sometimes overlap that perfectly with just like sexual lust, and we've lost a lot of times in the West, at least, the cultural ability, or at least in America, the cultural ability to pull the sensuality of lust, or maybe not even the sensuality, but the, like, the physical carnality back from that. And, like, one of my best friends, Colin, he's a Roman Catholic priest. He is one of the most romantic people I know, and the level of sensuality and excitement and desire I have to interact with my friend is high, even though I don't have any desire to have sex with him, right? Like, one, he's a celibate, but two, like, I'm not attracted to him physically, but being able to say, like, I have an attraction to this person, and it is stimulating and it is exciting, and I love every single time we are together, and I get excited by the idea of a conversation with this person. Like, uh, I think relationships have this really amazingly transcendent reality that we oftentimes don't explore, because we either decide I like somebody, I don't like somebody, and that's as far as it goes, or we over associate that type of stimulation with only sexual stimulation rather than learning, like, hey, I'm going to see Keegan and Sarah next week, and they are the two people, or two of the people that I care the most about in my life. And we only get to see each other really once a year right now. And I am so excited to be with them and to hang out and to sit with them and eat with them. And, like, it is distracting in my daily life for me to suddenly be hit with the reality that we're going to hang out. getting to have dinner with you at Gen Con, getting to meet Marcus for the first time after working together for 2 years, like the people who were excited to spend time with, and then getting to sit and spend time with those people. I think that's one of the most affecting things that we can do. But I think, I mean, for me, obviously, like when you get the hormone and endorphin rush of lust, that's great. But when we can actually experience that about other people in a non-erotic way, I think that's a really truly transformative thing. And my experiences in spirituality really kind of mirror that, right? Like I was somebody who grew up in a puritanical culture of the South that really isn't even proper to Catholicism so much as it's proper to the American South and the generalized religiosity there, specifically in fundamentalist Protestant groups that really suffuse Southern culture. Like I'm in a panel next week at PAX about growing up in the South and doing RPGs, because it's a special type of trauma. The, um, so like the I was taught a lot like desire is bad, and I don't think there's anything more damaging to teach a young person than desire is bad, and then to tell them, hey, you can do anything you want, right? You can do anything you want, but if you want it too much, it's a sin and wrong, and you're a bad person. You're going to hell. And so there's all these kind of weird tensions that come into that, and it almost lends itself not that Buddhism is inherently bad, but like the cessation of desire, the trying to eliminate desire, I think inherently um disconnects you from what makes us human. Like most people, and I've said this a couple times in a couple different ways, most people desire what is good, or what they perceive as being good for them, at least. Now, are there some people who want things that are bad because of some sort of whatever? Yeah, absolutely. But overwhelmingly, we want things that are good, or that we perceive as being good for us, because otherwise, why else would we want them? And but I grew up not being able to reconcile that with the fact that it felt like the things I wanted, a lot of the culture that I lived in and cared about told me were bad and wrong.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, it was really as an adult that I started to kind of really be able to unpack that and really look at to what is my own faith, as well as what does society and broader philosophical structures say about desire. How do I incorporate those, and how do I integrate those into my daily life? And that's really transformative in, like, I don't know that you can really have a healthy spiritual lens without an understanding of how desire fits into that, whether it is about the suppression of it or whether it's about the engagement of it. But as somebody who firmly believes in integration, right, that like we have to learn to live to the fullest of ourselves, my deepest experiences of spiritual engagement, right, which I'll use very hopefully transparent but specific language. And if you don't believe, like anybody listening doesn't believe in God, like whatever, throw this out, skip ahead, whatever. Like you don't need to subject yourself to this if it's going to be challenging for you or harmful. Just skip ahead a little bit. I'll keep it short.
Oh, don't. You can learn something, even if it's not
I know, but
God.
like,
Yeah.
but don't. I don't want anybody listening to
Don't
do harm to
skip. Yeah,
themselves.
be
Right?
open.
Yeah.
Be open. Yeah.
Well, unless it's going to hurt you, and then
Oh, yeah.
be good to yourself. Like, if I believe that God is a person, which I do, or persons, and if I believe that I can have a relationship with that person, and if that relationship is as distinctive and unique, like my relationship with you is going to be unique to our relationship. Your relationship with your spouse is going to be unique to your relationship. You're not going to relate to your spouse the same way you relate to me, and I'm not going to relate to your spouse the same way I relate to you. If we believe, if there is a God and that God is a person, and if we can have a relationship with that God, then those relationships will all be individual and they will be distinctive. And if they are good, then they should be exciting, and we should be thrilled about the presence of that person or persons in our lives, right? And this is language that's thrown out a lot in Christianity. but it's very surface language a lot of the time.
Mm.
And so for lack of a better term, like concepts like personal encounter, right, with the person of Jesus or with God or with the divine or whatever, I literally, though I have a spiritual lens, I think it's fine for people to attach to what is most high and most good in their life. If that is a divine thing to you, great. I can't imagine having a sense of divinity and not seeking to engage that. Like, I'm the kind of person who, if God is a horrible monster, wouldn't like, if God is Cthulhu, can't wait for him to demolish my mind. Like, that is 100% the type of person I am. Like, I would have to reach out and touch the thing. I would have to be excited about that. I would have to let it transform me. Um, and I have had moments in my life where I've experienced that on a really intense level, where I lose a sense of time. I experience a sense of presence, where I have a sense of communication directly and explicitly to me. I experience the solace of a loved one holding you or putting a hand on your shoulder, um, through prayer and a way. And when I talk about having a personal relationship with God, these are the things that I am talking about. Like, I pray and I talk to God, sometimes out loud, sometimes in my head. All of that is totally insane. Like, there's no, I mean, I think the only two I mean, that's not true. I think the two most rational ways to look at the universe are that there is something out there that exists, or there is nothing out there that exists. Either way, for me, I'm wired as the kind of person who experiences something that is consistent and persistent that I cannot define. And even if it's just future Tony reaching back to me, which I don't sense it as being, but as whatever. Um, I have moments of transcendence that will change my way of thinking about or approaching things, that where there are senses and thoughts that are not my own that I bump up against in my innermost being and transform me. And I mean, like, I don't know what to call that except for God. God. And it's, and what it is oftentimes calling me forward. And so outside of but it is relational, right? Like, it is erotic, it is sensual. And when I was young, I was and oftentimes taught by culture that sensuality and that type of experience is wrong, but it's actually kind of at the root of my experience of God and a lot of what even the church proposes about the experience of God. The problem is if we just think it's all about sex, and sex is great, like sex is
Yeah.
wonderful, but that's such a Western objectified, commodified version of sex that we're oftentimes presented with, as opposed to intimacy, right? Which is really
Yeah.
oftentimes what sex is reaching to, right? But
Yeah.
my favorite thing about I used to run an interview show where I talk to people about their religious experiences. You can probably still find it on the internet. It's called Threshold Podcast, right? I talk to Catholics and non-Catholics, and people who are not spiritual at all. It was a great show, but like, I would start every single by the end of every single show, I was absolutely in love with the person I was interviewing. Like, I was in love with them. Like, I was delighted. I mean, there's probably one or two shows where that may not have been the case, but like,
Yeah.
overwhelmingly, my guest was somebody I cared so much about that I invited into in a space of conversation like this. Um, and that I got to spend an hour falling in love with. And then talking to my best friend who happened to be a Roman Catholic priest for like 15 minutes at the end about what was that conversation like, you know?
Mhm.
um, and so I I don't, you know, uh, um, I am, if I die and there is nothing, I won't know, because there will be nothing. Um, if I die and there is nothing and I have lived my life better for having been a person of faith, it's great that I was a person of faith. If I am have deeper and better relationships because of that, that's great. If I become a better version of myself, that's great. if I don't, then it's worthless. But if it changes me for the better and lets me make the world a better place, even if it was all untrue, even if it's like there's a different God who's like, gotcha, none of that was true the whole time, it was all
Yeah.
me, Odin. Um,
Yes,
okay,
you did good.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, was I a better and more loving person for that? Was I more open because of that? But yeah, I prayer is a hugely kind of transformative thing for me. And it is hard to be like, because I'm like, as you can tell, I'm very conscious of like, I love my faith, but I don't need it to be someone else's for it to be valid.
Yeah.
And
That's a great
I
way
don't,
for same faith, I think. It's
yeah, and I don't want it to be an imposition on somebody else either. Like there's a there's a term that will get thrown around in circles that do evangelization work, which I do kind of consider that I do, but not in some sort of, toxic way or colonialist way of
mhm.
like what is good and true and beautiful should propose something. It shouldn't impose something, right? Like I should be presenting, here is the good, true, and beautiful thing that I've experienced. I shouldn't be saying you have to experience this thing
Yeah.
to be good or to be true or to be beautiful. Like, nor regardless of what the institution of the church might desire, did the actual mystical teachings of the church say that we need to do in any way, shape, or form. Um, but yeah, my life is dramatically transformed for staring into space and listening to voices and having conversations with entities that may or may not exist. Um, which I think probably easily sits in the realm of mind expansion and
Yeah.
altered perceptions of reality. Sure.
Yeah. Wow. And and when do you have those moments this experience happened to you? Do it really usually through prayer, or they happen in moments that you need the most? Or
Yeah, it varies. I mean, like that's kind of like saying, how do you uh how do you see your mom? Like,
yeah,
like, yeah, the answer is yes.
yeah,
Like you have regular times you interact with your mom, and then sometimes you need your mom. Like,
yeah.
uh the if you don't need
That's
your
a
mom,
great
like,
answer already. That's a
yeah, I
great
mean,
answer already. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so practically speaking, like it's going to sound very familiar to something we talked about earlier. Uh Oftentimes in hours before sunrise or sunset, I will go on a walk.
Yeah.
I will do a little bit of physical action.
Moments of solitude. Yeah.
I will take some time in quiet. Yeah, and there are times where it happens communally also. Those communal ones tend to be more guided. And like as somebody even who helps used to help lead religious experiences, I'm pretty conscious of like, oh man, like some of the weird toxic shit that youth workers get up to. There used to be like the concept of like, hey, we're gonna take kids out into a woods and we're gonna get them tired and we're gonna make sure they're not gonna eat well and they're gonna be poorly hydrated. And then when they're tired, they're gonna get really emotional. And then when they get really emotional, we're gonna give an impassioned speech and tell them that that was God. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is
Wow.
the worst form of manipulation and brainwashing you could possibly inflict on young people. We used to run retreats and events, and some of our rules were things like everybody needs to be well hydrated. Not only will we have multiple good meals per day, there will be snacks in between. We will provide plenty of time for people to sleep overnight, and if people need to take naps during the day, that is fine also too. Like we tried to actively
Yeah.
avoid like any of the brain stuff, and yet like people would still have experiences and encounters. Now it's some of that communal, like the communal reality of humans, possibly, right? Like if I had certainty of that, beyond my own experience, it wouldn't be faith, right?
Yeah.
But like you have to be able to provide some level of intellectual honesty and note the types of cognitive dissonance are in play if you want to be able to talk about the divine experience through liturgy and communal experiences, right? Because they do happen and they can be very profound, but we've got to be real specific and dialed in on kind of what that means. I think a lot of the time. I think it's best oftentimes when explored on the individual level, even if it was something that was in community. And I think that's the best way to unpack most things.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, like a lot of times nowadays it's solitude, or within a close group of friends. I have had ones that have happened in very large groups, but like I even start to mentally inspect, like, had I slept enough? Like, did I eat? Like, was I dehydrated? Is this
Yeah, yeah.
is this a normal physiological experience, or was this something else,
Something
right?
else.
Yeah. And so like I said, I try to be really mindful of those things, both as somebody who led them and then as just an individual. Like I think skepticism about the divine is super healthy. I think if faith is going to exist, it has to exist alongside doubt. I
Yeah.
think that we have a culture who tries to tell us those two things
One's
are,
define the other. Yeah.
yeah, opposite of each other, but like really they are two sides of the same. Because again, if we don't
Yeah.
have doubt, then we are not
Yeah.
experiencing faith,
One
right?
defines
Like,
the other. We,
yeah,
we can have
and
one without the other. Yeah.
yeah, and that is a place that a lot more people of faith, a lot of people of faith find themselves. Like the Hebrew and Jewish tradition do phenomenally in this area. The Christian tradition less so.
Mm.
Even Eastern traditions are far more open to some of that tension than Western traditions tend to be, because we tend to hold the rational mind in higher regards than the mystical tradition, in the Roman to Western USian cultural
Yeah.
pipeline. And so yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. But yeah, that is the area in which I experience probably the most transformation. And it's a lot of the same times that I would experience the highest level of creativity also too. Like, I mean,
Yeah. I
my
think they're
rituals for
related. Yeah.
yeah, my rituals for creativity, my rituals for experience the divine, like tend to coincide, which we could look at in both directions. Is your creative brain just firing, and therefore you're experiencing a sense of connection with the universe? Sure. Is God a source of creativity that the human mind is a likeness of, and therefore when you engage in creativity you are touching the divine? Sure. Like both
Yeah.
of those things can be true, and they could also each be true without having to necessarily
Yeah.
imply the other. I am okay with, with that. But it also kind of helps start to restructure the way you think about creative work, right? Like, um, uh, even going back to touching on higher power, like I said, we work a lot with people in recovery, like in the 12 step program actually comes out of the Jesuit Catholic tradition by and large. The concept of a higher power like can be creativity. Like creativity can be a higher power. Like a higher power is just acknowledging you are not the biggest thing,
Yeah.
right?
You're not
Like,
in control. Yeah.
yeah. And so even learning that there are things that work beyond you is a huge part of starting to understand some of those different pieces. And
Yeah.
losing that control in a healthy way, or that sense of control in a healthy way, is incredibly transformative, because it's really what starts to set us free to
It's a
do.
relief. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you talked about the loss of anxiety, right? Like it sets us
Yeah.
free to do the things that we want to do when we realize, like, not only do I not have that control, me grasping at it is what's driving me
Yeah.
insane, right? And so I can keep on trying to grasp at it, or I can go do a thing, a
Yeah.
fun. I can play a game. I can write a thing. I can do some art. Um, we even talked. You had tweeted out about your diagnosis the other day, and like I love that you shared that. My wife, we just last year both did the batteries for autism, and I did it because she wanted me to compare my score to hers. And you can get this test online. It's an actual diagnostic tool. It's not just like a whatever. Like, um no typical person from an holistic versus autistic standpoint will ever score above a 60 on the battery. No, and if you score above that, that just means you have some level of autism, or level. You have autism, some sort of sensory spectrum perception. And so I was really hard on myself and scored a 39. I'm certainly neurodivergent. I'm not neurotypical, but it's not autism. And my wife
But
was
I
really
mean,
light
does
on
it
herself.
really work, even if you're like really? Because as we get older, we start to adapt to stuff. Because the way I did the testing,
the test
ahead,
takes into like test asks. Sorry, no, you're fine. I interrupted actually. The test asks you to reflect on multiple periods of history in your life. So it's testing to see how your masking developed as part of that process potentially. So if you say I used
for me,
I did it until I was 12 and then I stopped is a pretty strong sign of like, okay, you learned how to mask, not hey, you stopped doing this. So she scored like 130 something. So which is very high. And it's really funny because most people, if you would ever ask, is Trisha autistic? They would have said no. Like, obviously not. Like, even people when we were telling them, we're like, she's not autistic. Like, like, no. Like, and now we're just like, how did we not know? Like, how, and like the freedom of her being able to start to like unmask, right? Like, it's difficult. Like, it's inconvenient for the rest of us to not have somebody who's willing to continue to mask around you. Like, oh, like good, like good for us to be inconvenienced instead of them. But like one of the things I said when you tweeted out about it is like a helpful diagnosis is a good diagnosis. Like it doesn't, like and for you it's very obviously been like a freeing diagnosis, right? Like it seems like. And so there's things to learn, and like when people start to unmask, things start to like shift, and like but like my wife's energy level is way better than it was, because she's not emotionally drained by the work of masking all the time. And even like one of the first ways I knew my wife loved me, and this goes back to being like, was like she would be rude to me, and she was such a people pleaser, but she was rude to me, and like I don't love that she was rude to me, but like it was a clear sign to me that this woman cares about me because she will tell me the truth, and she won't tell anybody. She won't necessarily tell other people, and that she felt comfortable enough to be able to do that. And man, looking back, it's like what a classic sign that she was masking with everybody else, but felt safe enough around me not to mask, right? And those those types of transitions, or those types of that notice is like such an interesting thing. And for her, like it's been such a helpful diagnosis. Like it's been a helpful to start knowing how and understanding. But like there's so many moments where like, how did we not know that you were autistic from all of these things, right? And so I mean, I think there's so many things we have to look at. We have to ask the question, like, what is helpful for us in this? Like, and how does this help us process and
it's about that. It's about how can that, it's how you approach Catholicism too. Like you said, all this, the teachings, the dogmas, and some traditions, but you go deep and you see what's useful, what can help people, and that's what matters most. It's in the same thing as the diagnosis. The same thing it's just one thing. For me, it's relates a lot with stoicism. I am autistic, and that can be good or bad depending on how I look at it. And I can see that it's something that's a mark that's bad for me, but it's also something that understands my limitations and can, help me accept things that I wouldn't accept before, and then maybe be more forgiving about myself or I don't know.
Well, it's also like
being different. I accepted I'm different and then explore this difference and see. There's always. I talked to a friend yesterday, and he was thinking about doing exams because he thinks he might be autistic too, and talk about the difficulties that we have. But I also reminded him that there is also the other side of the coin too. The things that we sometimes get with it. Sometimes you pay attention to more stuff, do you per focus, you can, I don't know, you can use some of these characteristics for your own good too, right?
Like people with ADHD can hyper focus like no one else. The question is, can you choose when to hyper focus? And you can't, because you can't regulate it, but you can get better at it. And if you can learn how to turn on that
can
type of flow
train.
for yourself, like the amount of stuff that you can get done when you learn how to hack that part of your brain, it's really strong. And you know, I even love the move like right now from like going from, hey, somebody is neurotypical, neurodivergent, to being like, let's start talking specifically about the type of information processing someone does. Like, are they autistic or are they allistic? Like, let's not identify one as neurotypical and the other one is not, because in all honesty, what we're discovering is like it is far more common than we considered as we've broadened our understanding of autism, for people to experience something on the autism spectrum side of things, like some sort of process. And even me, like there are, like I don't, but I have sensory issues that like, and it's, of course, as soon as I mention it, I start thinking about them and want to do them all. Like, you know, like I have some sensory issues as part of my neurodivergency that are not autism related, but still exist. And it is like neurotypical is such a polite cultural lie that just reinforces a lot of current modes of being, as opposed to being like, hey, let's talk about how people process information. Are you autistic, are you allistic, right? Like, hey, let's talk about like how you pay attention to things. Like, do you have like a hyperactive attention deficit? Like, do you experience Edison trait? Are you a divergent or integrated like processor? Like all these types of things. Like I don't think in linear pathways. Like I can't, like I can do it. Like I'm very good at process, and I'm very good at process and writing down a linear path, because my brain doesn't think that way. And so it's very good at calculating out what are all the different ways you could go, where are the common beats in that. Let's denote those common beats and ignore everything else, because all that really matters is that we hit beat. How we get there, and if we hit other ones in between, that's all fine. The important things are this. And once I know what this, and this are, then it's easier for me to make sure I get the thing done, even though I may take different routes to get there every single time, because that's the only way my brain can stay engaged, right? And so starting to like recognize some of those different ways that we all process information, and starting to discard neurotypicism, I think is going to be such a healthy thing that we're experiencing. Like I hope our children will grow up in a world where people are less thought about as oh, here is essentially, for lack of a better term, normal and abnormal, which is really what we're doing when we use language like that. But hey, what are some key indicators that don't tell us who somebody is, but helps us understand how somebody engages with information and processes, that help us serve better as a community or as a team? Like, because that's when it's important. The rest of the time, we can all be free to process through things how we need to. And so hopefully we're more and more so headed those directions.
Yeah. Well, Tony, I know it is taking a long time, over 2 hours. I just a few more questions. They're more whimsical ones at the end.
Have fun editing this later, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I just cut out the noise and stuff. I don't go deep into it, because.
But I also know how long most of your episodes have been, and to anybody who is still here, I apologize.
Yeah. No, well, I don't apologize. I thank you, and I think we're having great conversation. We're taking a lot of it, so it's a. I think it's a project for everyone that can sustain that much of attention, because I know it's hard today. I have sometimes hard time, following a great big conversation, but I think it's important. And my cat's going crazy here after a paper. But Tony, some of the last whimsical questions is, do you believe in ghosts, aliens, and supernatural creatures or anything? And have you any kind of experience with this? Have you ever seen ghosts, UFO? Or...
Yeah. So another weird part of UFOs, I'm pretty sure we're not alone in the universe. I don't know if I believe that those things regularly visit Earth or not. I feel like we're probably under quarantine if they've looked at us at all closely. But I don't in no way, shape, or form disbelieve in them. I don't believe in large scale conspiracies around them, except for potentially the like on the Earth. I believe that potentially outside of the Earth there is a galactic conspiracy to isolate human beings from everybody else. The ghosts, yeah, absolutely. I think I probably have a pretty like as somebody who believes in the eternality of the human soul. I absolutely believe that and the attachments that could happen after life. Overwhelmingly, I tend to skew more towards demonic and less towards human souls remaining around, though I don't necessarily think those two things can't be interlinked. But obviously I believe in the supernatural, and I so one of the other weird things about me that I have a pretty refined spiritual sense, and I will experience the presence of certain things being afflicted by evil spirits or by good spirits, that places are holy or unholy. Um, and I did oftentimes see different figures and images and have different sensory experiences when in those places from the time I was a child through the time I was an adult. And so there is a good chance that I am just crazy. However,
We are, yeah,
yeah.
in some
So
way.
yeah, that's my shortish answer to that.
Wow, wow. Can you share any episode that you saw something, you felt something?
Yeah, so I used to I mean, yeah, I mean any number of them. Like it's really interesting. There's like a section at the end of our woods, and people have a tendency to overread into any of these types of things. But we live at the end of a like one end of our street, you can take a train down into Center City in Philadelphia in about 15 minutes. The other end, there's 13 miles of untouched wilderness. Within the untouched wilderness, there's a lot of things like old stone structures, other stuff like that, ruins. One of them is even 100% a one of the earliest occult sites in American history.
Ah,
The occult site doesn't strike me as spiritually afflicted in any way, shape, or form. But there are a couple, but I had a really bad like feeling about something out there, and we did find a ruin that I was just like, "This is it. Something bad happened here." Like, and it was bothering me for a long time. And we finally, I just kind of went on a walk looking like I could. It was just a sense of there's something nearby that is making
yeah.
me, and went on. I just found it, and so when I was I, it is like an easy way to say this, though this is not accurate to my spiritual tradition nor how I would interpret it. Like, I also have just a vague sense of, for lack of a better term, auras for a lot of people and things also too. So like, and that can be colors, the amount of distance from their body, shapes of things. Like, it's not constant, but it's pretty persistent and a lot of the time. But it's also something I kind of have to pay attention to.
To focus to really be able to see, or it's just sometimes it
No, like
appears.
it's something like if I was like how many green things did you see today? Right? Or do
Yeah,
you see any green things around you? Could look around and be like, I see green things around me. Yeah. But you wouldn't necessarily be sitting there thinking green thing, green thing, green thing,
yeah, yeah.
green thing, green thing. Like and so like that, like I have to it's been 40 years of living with it, so I don't process it like I did when I was a younger person who didn't have any sort of
Yeah.
context for what was happening. And now it is something that though I always see it, I have to choose to pay attention to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're all accustomed to it already, right?
Right.
Yeah. Uh,
So, but
Tony, if
like also
yeah,
if you see a big if there's a big green painting on the wall, you're gonna be like, oh,
yeah,
there's a big green paint. So there are, again, that's like there are times where it's just like, oh, there's a thing.
it calls
But
attention
yeah.
to itself sometimes, right? Yeah. Tony, if you could have any superpower you could imagine, what would you choose to have, and what would be the first thing you would do with it?
So um there, I think as you get older, there's different answers that come up. I super speed is still ultimately the one, as long as it comes with some moderate level of like if we're not monkey pieing any of them and we're giving you like the associated suite of powers you need for it to function, like because you have super speed, you essentially have to have some level of enhanced durability, otherwise you would just break your legs when you ran, right? So as long as we're not getting the weird
Yeah,
monkey paw version of things,
yeah,
super
no,
speed
of
still
course. Yeah.
still largely tops out my list. But I think as I get older, like man, if I just had like super metabolism, I'd be real happy with that. And I think that's even like a subset of super speed. It's just like I digest food at a faster rate and I don't get dummy thick like I am. The so yeah, super speed. If I had super speed, I would just go like I would visit people like like New York, is an hour drive. I mean, there's so many good friends there, I can run down to Brazil real quick, hang out with you, like
Why would you
super
choose,
speed.
for example, super speed instead of teleportation? Again, a lot of people come here and say teleportation, and you
So
were
my
the
wife's
first one
just
to say super speed, and I find that
yeah,
great because it's different. But I would like to know
my wife is
why.
super my wife is teleportation. I am super speed because super speed has practical benefits that
Yeah,
doesn't
true.
one higher metabolism. Two, uh, two like
Finish
if
commissions faster,
if
like
you yeah if
doing
you have to do
art
like
stuff. Yeah,
typing faster, processing
yeah,
information. Like if I have to do a repetitive thing, being able to be done in 5 minutes, like teleportation doesn't get that, right? And so like
yeah,
super speed, even though there's definitely some limitations to it, I think has far more utility
yeah.
than
I
that.
didn't thought about that. Of
Yeah.
course.
And so yeah, anyways, yeah, super speed is my still my number.
Great, great answer. And if you could choose any weird, fantastical, or sci-fi thing to be real in our world, what would you choose and why?
That's such a that's such a good question. If I could choose any sci-fi thing to be
Or
real
fantasy, or
or fantasy. Yeah, I mean I do it is dumb. Um but like it is what immediately came into my head. And part of it is just again, I can think of 11-year-old Tony opening the book for the first time. Um I think ornithopters from Frank Herbert's Doom sound like a really cool way to get around because they're like these insect like vibrating wing. I just think it's a really cool type of air travel, and that's a super lame answer, but
it's
it's
great.
probably
It's
because it's one of the things that one of the first vehicles that kind of captivated my imagination as
yeah,
a
it's
child.
from you. It's personal. It's a great answer. It's unique. Uh, yeah. And Tony, last question. Do you remember the last time you felt really happy and glad to be here? And if you do, can you?
Besides right now during this
Yeah.
conversation,
Thank you.
uh I I had a really good moment of confluence earlier today with somebody, but I don't know that necessarily reached that level. Um, I've had a really good month and a half. I had a year that was really difficult for me this last year, and really like I got some news that we were going to be able to go just back to being an independent company about what was it now, like 10 weeks ago. And it's been a ton of work, but the freedom of that and being able to share with our community and being able to share that with Keegan and Sarah and start talking to them and Johnny about what we were going to be doing and how we wanted to move forward. The freedom in that transition has been really, and like people have commented, like you're like somebody was like my mom on the phone there was like, you seem so happy right now, like you like in a way you have not been, and so um
You're building
uh
something, right? As you said,
for
like you're
building something, but yeah, but
building
like
something,
also
yeah,
yeah, but
with
and like
people.
yeah, and it's not about like capitalism or acquiring things, but
I don't
ownership,
know.
like ownership that like being able to just be like, I'm going to check in with three of my friends on if we want to do a thing. And if the answer is yes, then they're going to trust me enough to just go do the thing. Whether that's what we're going to publish, whether that's running a Kickstarter campaign, whether that's this con or that con, how we're spending money in the budget, other things like that. Like accountability with the freedom and agency to act and the ownership of everyone involved moving things forward, like that's so exciting to me. And I realized like part of the reason I even like wanted to do the merger originally was like I was just so lonely, and like I was tired of doing it all on my own. And even though we had community, but like what I really should have done was just give up some of what I was trying to keep all to myself, right? Like invite other people in an intentional and meaningful way. And getting to that space, even though it took a year of kind of hardship to get there. And there are a lot of great things to happen along the way. Was has been just such a great thing. And there's this experience of freedom and openness that I'm so excited for what's coming up for Plus One and for our like community in a semi-parasocial way, but in a way that authentically like people who are invested in what we're doing and who we are investing in. And I'm so excited for that.
Yeah. It's been great seeing like this zine project you're doing, like to promoting like every month people getting new stuff. It's a
Yeah,
great idea, and then
we've got our first it's a Kyle Tam project. I love Kyle. Urania Games. I love the way Kyle writes. I love the way Kyle thinks. Kyle's a great Southeast Asian creator. We're getting to put out their solo Wretched and Alone game called Prima Donna next month, and it's the first one we did the art and the layout for. Like it was a completed manuscript, and so like we got to breathe life into it. And really, it's been an almost entirely RPG team. So like Johnny, it's actually all Philippines. So Johnny, Kyle, and Red, who did the art, are all based out of the Philippines. And I'm just so excited to share the game. The layout's fun. The writing's great. The layout's phenomenal. The art is such a great compliment to it. The final product we ended up with is great articulation of Wretched and Alone. And then the other one we're putting out next month is Michael Van Vliet, so one of the contributors for Was Sailing. Die Grave Robber Dies. This is the same guy who did like Devil Aim High, which is a Trophy Dark incursion. It's kind of Western vibe, but this one is like kind of Frankenstein body horror. I got to watch Michael run it at Big Bad Con this year. We'd already decided to publish it because I love what Michael writes. But Michael's somebody who comes alive when they run games, like in a way that they're always funny and they're always enjoyable to be around. But like watching them run a game, and they're very good at like getting the game to a place where then they can just sit back and watch the players engage with each other for like 10 or 15 minutes as they talk through some sort of moral quandary or decision that they're about to do, and then just like hop back in. Like, but is it like they're just perched the entire time, ready to respond? And just writes just the best stuff. They're the one who did all the room writing, so like all those sensual details that I talked about. So like I'm so excited to do their stuff. And then in January we finally get to put out Last Oath by Lucas. So we're finally getting that out in January. So just lots of like and getting to make amazing things with great creators, like and getting to take a game by Kyle or Michael or Lucas, and just be like, we're gonna print it, and 100 or 200 copies are immediately going to go out. And like, there is no Kickstarter or crowdfunding we're doing here. Like, you made a great thing. We have 200 people who have already told us we want a great thing. And the bigger those numbers get, that also means that like more people who subscribe means that like every month we get to start writing life-changing checks to small creators. And like life-changing, like is Lucas going to retire to an island after this? No. But we're going to cut Lucas a check that could be a couple of months of rent, right? That
makes a huge difference.
That's a lot. That's great.
Yeah.
Like I love being like, here's rent for you for 2 or 3 or 4 months. There is no better thing than being able to do that, right? And so being able to put the thing out, let the person see their created work in the world, hold it in their hands, and being like, oh, also here is rent for the next few months. Like that's if we could just keep on doing that forever. Like I'm so excited about all the stuff that's happening with Zine Club.
I remember one of the first times I helped a friend to publish in the US and then publish a zine, Resulted Funeral, for example, and they received their first check and they were able to like not worry about rent for like 3 months. And
Right.
it's something.
Like we just had to, we just had to increase our, because like we basically do like 200, typically print like 200 games at a time, like whenever we print them. If we know it's going to be bigger, we'll do more, but like print 200 games, like, but for Zine Club, like I just had to bump up because like we're only ending up with like 80, less than 80 copies left of a game typically afterwards now, because we sell them other places and all. Like it's not just going out through Zine Club. Zine Club, we're a little over 100 members in the club. Would love to have more members of the club. The technology, we're still figuring out little things that don't work right every single month, and we're fixing those things as we go along. So, but I'm really excited about 2024 for that. We've got a couple of stores that have signed up now. We have a bookstore that's in San Francisco. They don't even, they're not even an RPG. They're not an RPG store. They were just like, we want to do more RPG stuff. We don't want to do more D&D stuff. We signed up for this, and I'm like, I'm so excited. And so like being able to just know, hey, we've got this initial pop. It's going to be great, and then we're going to send it to IPR, and we're going to get it out to our store partners. We're going to have it on the website, and so like we're going to know that, and then we are becoming more sustainable because of that. We're able to pay staff salaries. We're able to invest in conventions. We're able to print other games that aren't part of Zine Club. Like it's really great to see that mechanism start to kind of click into its own thing. So I'm hoping, I'd love to get to 300 subscribers by the end of the year, but if we get to 200, I'll be super happy. We got about a month left to go and less than 100 that we've got to do. So PAX will be big for that, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so. So Tony, we reached the end of the questions. I'm so happy for you to be here. We had a great chat. You shared a lot about yourself, about your journey. So I'm really grateful for you to be here and be brave and share all of this. But do you have any last messages for the weirdos that might be hearing us out there?
Yeah, thank you for being who you are. Like, people will ask me on a regular basis how we choose who we publish, who we print, who I want to work with. Overwhelmingly for me, like, I am excited when somebody has a voice, when somebody has a perspective, when somebody has a thing that they want to get out of themselves. Overwhelmingly, I find that those are weird people. And so, you know, from one weirdo to another, I'm really glad that your voice is out there. And I hope that you're making it more heard on a regular basis.
Yeah, great voice. Be the weirdos you want to be and be happy being that. Tony, can you take us out saying like the catchphrase of the show and just keep it weird, everybody?
Keep it weird, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.